Hey, what's going on guys? My name is Asian Psycho, aka ToeSniper98, but you can just call me Tuhu. This video has been a small project of mine that I've been working on for the past month or so, in which I've drafted every single one of Hololive's currently active VTubers as servants in a mobile game called Fate Grand Order. You might have heard of this game. Since FGO's idea of a collaboration event is putting an eggplant in a dance hall and having a knockoff idol event when the player base wanted Lost Belt 6, understand that this video is made purely for fun and not actually anything official. I just happen to play FGO too much and throw way too much money at it, so don't take this video too seriously. Also note that while there will undoubtedly be a ton of references in this video, I may have not gotten them all or excluded some of the more recent ones because I simply can't fit them all or because I just forgot or didn't know about them, so try not to get triggered that your favorite clip didn't get referenced for your favorite Hololive VTuber here. I'm also aware that many of you have never played FGO or even know what it is to begin with, so for starters, Fate Grand Order is a turn-based mobile game RPG where you control historical, mythological, and fictional figures and beat the shit out of bad guys to save the world, you know, your typical JRPG shit or something like that. More relevant to this video, FGO's gameplay mechanics are quite unique and may not make a lot of sense to those who aren't familiar with the game already, so in order to understand how I've drafted these profiles, let's do a little crash course on the basics of the game first. If you already know all this because you already play FGO, or if you don't care about dumb shit like game mechanics and you just want to see your favorite VTubers, then skip ahead to the timestamps listed on the screen now or in the pinned comment below. If you're still here, then let's talk about FGO. This is going to take a long while, so bear with me. Specifically what you need to know in order to understand what you're seeing once we start talking about the actual servant drafts for all the Hololive girls. A typical battle in FGO begins with a party of 6 servants, 3 in the front line and 3 in the back line as sub-members with 1 support servant who's from your friends list. Generally speaking, your back line can't do much to support the front line, only your starting 3 servants are capable of actually doing anything in battle, so for the most part, your back line is strictly intended to be backup in case your starting servants start dying in combat. FGO operates off an interesting battle system in which servants have attack cards that are randomly dealt to you every turn, and you attack enemies using those cards. Every servant in the game has a deck of 5 cards, so with a full front line of 3 servants, the game deals you 15 cards over the course of 3 turn cycles, 5 per turn, and you choose 3 out of your 5 currently dealt cards in order to attack. Cards are divided into 3 types, Quick, Arts, and Buster. Quick cards have the lowest damage but can generate some MP charge and are the best at generating critical stars. Arts cards cannot generate any stars on their own, but they deal slightly more damage and are the best at generating MP charge. Buster cards can't normally produce crit stars or MP charge, but they deal the most damage. Every servant in the game has at least 1 card of each type, and one of their defining characteristics in-game is what kind of card deck they have, because how many of each type of card they have in their deck directly influences how they play and affect the rest of their team. One of these ways is a mechanic called card leadoff. In FGO, your starting card affects the rest of the cards in that combo in different ways depending on its type. Quick cards give their combos a bit of extra star generation, Arts cards boost their combos' MP generation, and Buster cards give a big damage buff to their combos. In other words, decks with more Quick cards are better at producing crit stars, decks with more Arts cards are better at generating MP charge, and decks with more Buster cards have better damage output, generally speaking. Another way is through another mechanic called chaining. If you select 3 cards of the same type, it's called a chain, and card chains further benefit your servants in a way similar to card leadoffs. A quick chain produces 10 critical stars for your servants to use next turn, an arts chain will charge the MP gauges of all servants whose arts cards participated in the chain by 20%, and a buster chain increases the damage of all its cards. There's a special chain called a brave chain that only occurs when you pick 3 cards that are all from the same servant. When this happens, that servant gains a special extra attack, which is essentially a 4th attack that they perform when normally your servants can only do 3 total. Logically then, you can pick 3 cards that are both from the same servant and are all the same type, and these are brave chains that are named after their type. So Quick brave chains, Arts brave chains, and Buster brave chains. Generally speaking, the only way for these to occur is by using a servant's Noble Phantasm, which is like their ultimate move in the game, but there are some servants whose card decks already come with 3 cards of the same type and can therefore brave chain with that type even without the help of their MPs. Critical stars and MP gauges that I mentioned a little earlier are things that non-FGO players are definitely not familiar with, so let's talk about how this game handles critical attacks first. your servants can deal crits that deal double damage, a bit more critical star generation, and double MP generation, but rather than basing it off a standard critical chance system like most other games, in FGO, your servants need critical stars that get randomly distributed to their cards, well, sort of, in order to land crits. The more stars a card gathers, the higher its chance to crit. One critical star gives 10% chance to crit, so if a card gathers 10 stars, its crit chance becomes 100% or guaranteed. So 50 critical stars is enough to guarantee that every single card on your current turn, regardless of which cards you pick, is going to be a crit. Remember that number when we start going over the Hololive VTuber servant profiles later in this video, because there are skills that produce stars instantly without the need to use quick cards. All servants have a noble phantasm. Even if you don't play FGO, if you've watched a Fate anime at some point in your life, you've probably heard of this term. In order to use it, a servant must charge their MP gauge at the bottom of the screen up to 100%. And when they do, on their next attack turn, a Noble Phantasm card appears on the top half of the card selection screen when you're about to select their attacks. These NP cards will always appear so long as your servant currently has at least 100% charge, and they will always be the same card type depending on the servant, though there are some servants who have the rare ability to change their NP card type. Other than card type though, NPs also come in 3 different kinds: single target, AoE, and non-lethal. Non-lethal NPs are also either support, utility, or install, or maybe a little bit of everything. Let's move on to skills. Every servant has 3 skills total. They start with 1 when you first acquire them and gain their other 2 as you level them up or ascend them, as the leveling process is called in FGO. In-game, you can use as many skills from your servants as you want in a single turn. However, once you use them, they're put on cooldowns with durations that vary depending on the skill that prevent you from using them again until these cooldown periods have elapsed. These are their active skills. All servants except for 1 in the base game, that is, have a varying number of passive skills that further help them in battle. While active skills are effects that need to be activated in-game in order to be used, passive skills have effects that are always active as soon as the servant joins the field, requiring no conscious effort on your part. This means that passive skill effects are not affected by whatever happens during a fight and will always be active no matter what. Servants come in a variety of classes in FGO. There are 7 main ones: sabers, archers, lancers, which are known as the knight classes, and riders, casters, assassins, and berserkers, which are known as the cavalry classes. But there are 5 additional classes: rulers, avengers, moon cancers, I know, alter egos, and foreigners, yes, also, I know. And these 12 classes total represent all the playable classes that servants in FGO can occupy. The type of class a servant is one of the most important traits that they can have, because FGO operates off something like a rock, paper, scissors interaction system where one class is strong against another but weak to another. So the following is the complete chart of all class interactions in the game, and they go as follows. Sabers are weak to archers but strong against lancers. Archers are weak to lancers but strong against sabers. Lancers are weak to sabers but strong against archers. Riders are weak to assassins but strong against casters. Casters are weak to riders but strong against assassins. And assassins are weak to casters but strong against riders. Rulers are weak to avengers but strong against moon cancers. Avengers are weak to moon cancers but strong against rulers. And moon cancers are weak to rulers but strong against avengers. These are the straightforward interactions in the game, and that if a servant is in a class disadvantaged position, they will receive double damage from their enemy and deal only half damage back to them. Inversely, if a servant is in a class advantage situation, they will receive half damage and deal double damage. So naturally, if a servant is in a neutral position against classes that they are neither weak nor strong against, they will deal and receive regular damage. Because of this, FGO is dominated by what's called a counter-class meta, quote unquote, where you bring servants of one class that will specifically counter whatever class the enemy is if you know what you're up against. But there are several more class interactions that are less straightforward than the ones we just mentioned, which are as follows. Berserkers deal 50% extra damage against all other classes except foreigners and receive double damage from everyone else except berserkers, who still only deal 50% extra damage to their own class. Foreigners are weak to alter egos but are strong against berserkers. However, they have an additional interaction in which they both deal and receive double damage from other foreigners. Alter Egos are the strangest class in terms of class interactions because they deal 50% extra damage against riders, casters, and assassins, but deal only half damage against sabers, archers, and lancers. They are strong against foreigners and deal double damage against berserkers like all other classes, but they are the only class in the game to not have a true class disadvantage against any other class. Yes, I know Kama exists for you guys who already play FGO, but she doesn't count. As big as her tits are, she still can't be a whole class by herself. All servants also have combat stats that determine certain aspects of their gameplay. Their two main ones are HP and attack, which are self-explanatory, but they also have some more obscure ones. Star Absorption determines the likelihood at which a servant's cards will pull in critical stars for themselves. Star Generation determines the base rate at which a servant's cards can produce critical stars. An MP charge on attack determines how much MP charge they can generate using their cards. These stats are all based on a servant's class. There can be slight deviations in these particular stats that are mostly determined by a servant's parameter charts that have stats like strength, endurance, agility, mana, luck, and NP, but these parameters are essentially just flavor text and don't really have much of an impact on actual gameplay. The more relevant ones are the following: MP charge on attack, alignment, which is mostly based on the traditional D&D alignment system, and gender. In FGO there are male, female, and even genderless servants, but for the sake of this video, all the profiles here are defaulted to female for what should be obvious reasons. There's also an even more obscure stat called death rate in this game, since FGO does have an insta-kill mechanic. Servants have varying death rates that show how easy or difficult it is for them to be insta-killed by enemies who have this mechanic. I won't be including these in the fan-made profiles in this video because that shit is mad complicated, and I'm spending enough damn time already right now explaining everything else. Plus, insta-kill is, well, mostly a trash mechanic anyway, since it hardly ever works for you outside of a few niche situations. Attributes are another mechanic which is similar to classes in that there are attribute advantage and disadvantage interactions, but are not as drastic as class interactions though. There are three main attributes: man, earth, and sky. Man denotes servants who are either actual historical figures or fictional figures who aren't part of other mythologies or legends. Earth denotes servants who have their origins in mythology or folklore but aren't born divine for the most part. And sky denotes servants who possess a high level of divinity, as in they're related to gods or goddesses, or they themselves are gods or goddesses. Man servants deal 10% more damage against sky but 10% less damage against earth. Earth deals 10% more damage against man, but 10% less damage against sky. And sky deals 10% more damage against earth, but 10% less damage against man. There are two more attributes called Star and Beast. Star denotes servants who have changed the entire course of human history through their accomplishments, while Beast denotes enemies and a few servants who pose a major threat to humanity as a whole and seek to destroy them. They have their own little interaction against each other in that they both deal 10% more damage against one another, but are neutral against everyone else. And finally, hit counts. Every card in a servant's deck, including their NP, has a hit count associated with it depending on the card type. Without getting too much into detail, card hit counts play a big factor in a servant's MP generation and critical star generation, and generally speaking, the higher the hit count, the better. Here's how a servant profile is going to be read in this video. I'll start with the Hololive girl's name, class, relevant stats, deck type, and their hit counts. Then we'll move on to their active skills. Active skills in FGO go from levels 1 to 10, and they get stronger incrementally the higher you level them, with the biggest jump in skill strength being the final level up from 9 to 10. For example, a charisma skill at rank A gives a 10% attack buff for everyone in the front line at level 1, 11% at level 2, 12% at level 3, so on and so forth, until it scales up to 18% at level 9, and then 20% at level 10. In addition, all skills at level 6 receive a 1-turn reduction in cooldown duration, and another one at level 10. For the sake of conciseness and for my own sanity, I'll be listing skill efficiency from the lowest to highest skill levels, along with their cooldown durations right after. After active skills are passive skills, then noble phantasms. I'll list what types they are and their effects. MPs have two parts to them, their main effects and their overcharge effects. Their main effects are usually determined by their MP level, which is increased by combining dupe copies of servants into the original. In other words, it's FGO's way of baiting whales like me into burning our wallets for the strongest possible 5-star servants. But at least the main effects are pretty straightforward. It's the overcharge mechanic that'll confuse those of you who don't play FGO, and I know for a fact that even some of you who do don't fully understand this either. Servants normally have an MP gauge cap of 100% at MP level 1 or NP1. However, starting from MP2, servants gain access to what's called overgauge, which is a mechanic that allows them to store MP charge past 100% up to 200% instead. At MP5, which is the highest MP level, servants can stock up to 300% charge maximum, though you'll almost never see this happen manually because of how long this will take to do normally. Just like MP levels, there are 5 overcharge levels total, with higher OC levels having stronger efficiencies. All MPs default to overcharge level 1 when they're used because servants gain access to their overcharge level 1 effects at 100% MP charge, which is when they can use their NPs. This means that when a servant uses their Noble Phantasm, they're not only using its main effects, but also its overcharge level 1 effect. In order to gain access to higher OC levels, though, you can do one of two things. The first is what I mentioned earlier by manually charging a servant's MP gauge, which takes a long time like I said. But if you can get a servant's MP gauge to 200% through normal cards, then their MP has OC level 2. The second and more efficient way to reach higher OC levels is by using multiple Noble Phantasms in succession, which is called an MP chain. You must use your MPs in succession in order to achieve higher overcharge levels. If you break up 2 MPs with a regular card in between them, you will not get an MP chain and therefore no upgraded OC level. In addition, only the MPs following the first one benefit from the upgraded OC mechanic. If you have 2 MPs that are both 100%, the first one will behave normally with OC1, but only the second one will have OC2. If you have 3 MPs all at 100% that are all used in the same turn, the first will be OC1, the second will be OC2, and the third will be OC3. As a corollary, if you do manage to get a servant's MP manually charged to 200% with another MP at just 100% and you decide to chain them, the MP at 200% basically has a free OC upgrade. However, using it first does not further upgrade the OC level of the next MP. So in other words, if you use the 200% MP first, then the 100%, both MPs will still be at OC2 because the first MP already had the 200% charge that got it to OC2, and the second MP was only at 100% and gained another OC level because it was second in the MP chain. However, if you reverse their positions so that the 100% MP goes first, it will stay at OC1, but the 200% MP then goes to OC3 because it's gaining an OC upgrade off the MP chain on top of already being at OC2 manually. It's because of this overcharge upgrade mechanic that it's possible for all MPs in the game to go up to overcharge level 5, though it's very rare to ever pull this off outside of like specific niche setups. Finally, to finish the servant profile, I list their bond CEs. CE stands for Craft Essence, which is like equipment or gear in other games, but servants can only hold one at a time when they go into battle. Every servant has what's called a bond level, which shows how much you've been playing with them. It's essentially like the friendship system in Genshin or the trust system in Arknights. At bond level 10, which takes a long time to get to for most players, all servants give you what are called bond CEs, which are special CEs that will only work if you equip them onto the servants who gave them to you in the first place and have them deployed on the front line. They're meant to describe moments or objects intimately important to the servants that they came from and be significant pieces of lore about them. But normally in the actual game, gameplay-wise, bond CEs are mostly trash and not worth using with only a few exceptions. So here in this video, I've taken the liberty of making them actually strong and worth using over other craft essences in the game. Those of you who are familiar with FGO already will probably find these the most broken things about the entire video. Now for some disclaimers, as if we didn't have enough already. All Hololive VTubers in this video are drafted as 5-star servants, because in FGO, the lowest rarity for servants is 1 star, while the highest and rarest is, well, 5 stars. Realistically, most of the profiles in this video should be 4 stars, but in order to avoid triggering different fan bases who think I did their favorite VTuber dirty by not making them an SSR, I just made them all SSRs instead, so I don't have to deal with that. This video is meant to be entirely for fun anyway, so realistic balancing and all that stuff isn't exactly the goal here in the first place. Speaking of realistic balancing, I went pretty wild with many of the profiles in this video and didn't really think about like balancing too much in favor of just having fun with the whole thing. Thankfully for me though, the Lightworks, the developers of FGO, don't really seem to care much for good balancing in their own game either, if servants like Merlin, Castoria, Super Orion, and God Juna are anything to go by. So try not to be this guy and project onto me why things should be quote-unquote balanced because you think it'll be more fun that way, because frankly, I don't fucking care. And one last thing, I promise. Some parts of this video may venture into Fateverse or general Nasuverse territory and might not entirely be accurate or feasible in terms of Fate lore. So if you're a Type Moon slave, again, try not to get too bothered by whatever inaccuracies you see in this video because, again, all this is just for fun. Now, finally, let's start the video. We'll begin first with the 0-Gen girl, so in case you haven't already buckled yourself in yet, you better do it now, cause here we go. First is the goddess herself, Tokino Sora. She's a ruler with 13,400 HP, 11,700 attack, and 1.35% MP charge on attack. She has a caster deck of triple arts cards with a 3-hit quick card, 1-hit arts cards, 2-hit buster card, and a 4-hit extra attack. She's lawful good and sky attribute, and her alternate class is caster. Her first skill is Idol's Charisma A++, which increases her party's attack by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, further increases the attack of all idol type servants in her party by another 10 to 20% for 3 turns, which includes herself and any other servant in FGO who's already an idol, like Elizabeth Bathory, and increases her own arts performance by 20% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Idol Steadfastness A+, which grants herself debuff immunity for 3 times with no turn limit and buff removal resistance for 3 times also with no turn limit. If Sora uses this skill when she still has stacks of these effects still active, she'll refresh her stacks back up to 3. Her self-buff removal resist has a 50 to 100% chance of succeeding on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is So You're the Enemy EX, which increases her own star absorption by 600 to 1000%, and crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns, and inflicts terror on all enemies for 1 time 3 turns. Terror has a 50 to 80% chance of stunning enemies every turn while it's active, and all this on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passive skills are Territory Creation Virtual B+, which increases her own arts performance and crit star generation by 9%, Magic Resist EX, which increases her own debuff resistance by 25%, Authority of the Idol EX, which increases the attack and defense of all idol type servants on the field with her by 5%, including herself, for every idol type servant on the field, but only as long as there are other idol servants on the field with her. The first Idol A, which allows all of Sora's cards during the first card cycle of every battle to automatically crit, and Earth and Sky EX, which render both her and Asuki immune to enemy MP drain effects when they are deployed together. Her Noble Phantasm is On Stage, which is a support and utility arts MP that draws the attention of all enemies to herself for 1 turn, increases her own defense by 30% for 1 turn, increases the party's defense by 30 to 50% for 3 turns depending on MP level, including her own again, and regenerates party HP by 2,000 to 3,000 every turn for 3 turns, also depending on MP level. It also increases party MP damage by 20 to 60% for 3 turns, depending on overcharge level. And her Bond CE is Yokohama Arena, which increases party arts performance by 10% and increases all idol type servants' attack by 15%. Sora is a hybrid support ruler who's great at buffing other idol type servants and protecting them with her NP that turns her into a tank for 1 turn with its defense buffs and taunt, and she has extremely potent debuff resistance to keep herself as strong as possible when she's taunting. But she can also play as an arts crit ruler with a bit of offensive utility and the ability to spam her NP more times than Ollie simps for her senpais. In either case, Sora should be very tough to defeat, normally thanks to the combo of her ruler class and defense buffs unless her enemies happen to be berserkers or avengers. Next is Asuki. Don't tell her I called her that though. She's an Avenger with most of the same stats as Sora, including her deck and hit counts, but she's Man attribute as opposed to Sora's Sky. Just like Sora though, her alternate class is Caster. As ASCII White, she's Lawful Neutral, but as ASCII Black, she's Chaotic Neutral. Her first skill is Felicia A, which increases her own debuff success rate and reduces all enemies' debuff resistance, both by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Starry Regrets A, which grants herself invulnerability for 2 attacks and an on-hit activate debuff for 2 times, which has a 500% chance to reduce an enemy's art's resistance by 10 to 20% for 3 turns if they attack ASCII on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Eternity Bright EX, which does one of 2 things. It allows ASCII to remove one ally's debuffs, including herself, and then recast those debuffs onto an enemy, or it allows her to remove one enemy's debuffs and then transfer them to another enemy. All transferred debuffs retain the same duration and efficiency at the time that they were removed. If there's only one enemy left on the field and ASCII wants to use a second option on them, it instead extends the duration of their currently applied debuffs by 1 turn and reduces their MP charge by 1. And it also increases her own art's performance by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C, which increases her own art's performance and star generation by 5%, Avenger Diva A, which increases her own MP generation rate when taking damage by 20%, but reduces all allies' instant kill resistance by 20% except herself as a demerit, Oblivion Correction Diva A, which increases her own crit damage and attack by 10%, and Self-Replenishment Virtual C, which charges her own MP gauge by 2.5% every turn and increases healing received by 5%. She also has dedicated Diva EX, which grants herself a 1.2x attack advantage against all idle type enemies, except against rulers and berserkers, and Earth and Sky EX, which renders her and Sora immune to arts performance debuffs when they're deployed together. Her final passive is Fade to Black EX. When ASCII takes fatal damage and doesn't already have a Guts buff active, she automatically transforms into ASCII Black at the end of the enemy's turn, which full heals her and lets her keep all the same status effects that ASCII White had when she died. ASCII White's NP is Inochi, which is a utility arts NP that removes the party's debuffs and stores them so that ASCII can recast those buffs using her third skill, reduces her own skill cooldown durations by 1, and has a 500% chance to reduce one enemy's attack and defense by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. Its overcharge effect also reduces that enemy's crit chance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. Now onto ASCII Black. Her first skill is Sayonara Hero A, which is the same as ASCII White's first skill, but now it also produces 10 crit stars every turn for 3 turns. Her second skill is Take Me to Heaven EX, which is the same as ASCII White's second skill, but now it also grants herself an on-attack activate buff for 3 attacks 3 turns that reduces an enemy's defense by 10% for 3 turns when attacking them. Her third skill is Fake A++, which is different from ASCII White's third skill. It instead removes the party's debuffs, extends the duration of all enemies' currently applied debuffs by 1 turn, increases party's arts performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and increases party's star gen by 50 to 100% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. She keeps all the same passives but with one exception. Fade to Black EX is replaced with Remainder in Black EX, which has a 500% chance to nullify any incoming Guts effect. It essentially prevents ASCII Black from receiving any Guts buffs from her teammates. ASCII Black's NP is I Cannot Control Myself, which is a one-hit single target arts NP that deals 900 to 1500% damage depending on NP level and reduces their arts resistance by 30% for 3 turns. She also produces 20 to 40 stars as her overcharge effect. ASCII's Bond CE is Without You, which increases the party's arts performance by 30%, but reduces their debuff resistance by 20% as a demerit. If she's deployed with Sora, as in they're both in the front line together, this CE increases both their crit damage with arts cards by 50%. There's a lot to talk about ASCII because she has a very experimental servant profile even for a video like this. She's a debuff controller, which is an archetype that doesn't exist in FGO proper. The idea behind her profile is that she's an alternative support who helps her team not by directly buffing them, but by weakening enemies instead with lots of debuffs. While servants with debuff heavy kits do exist in the base game, ASCII is different because she has a unique ability to not only cleanse buffs from her team but also recast them back onto enemies. In addition, she has an alternate form that's also built into her kit. There are actually a few more profiles in this video that feature this kind of mechanic, but Azuki is unique in that her black form only appears when her white form dies, and she can't toggle between her two forms at will like the others can. Azuki Black is intended to be the stronger version of Azuki White since they share the same skills, but Azuki Black's skills are generally stronger and she has a lethal NP as opposed to a non-lethal one, though she does lose Azuki White's ability to debuff transfer on her third skill. In exchange though, Azuki Black cannot have any guts effect applied to her, so once she's in the state, she cannot take fatal damage, otherwise she's gone for good. And just for your reference, in FGO, if a servant has a skill effect that says it can be used on an ally, like Azuki White's third skill for example, they can also use it on themselves. So throughout the video from now on, even if I don't specifically say that a skill that can be used on an ally can also be used on the servant casting that skill, just assume that they can in fact use it on themselves unless I say otherwise. Next is Robocop, who's an archer with 13,300 HP, 12,000 attack, and 0.70% MP charge on attack. She has what's called a balanced deck of 2 arts cards and 2 buster cards, which provide a balanced mix of MP generation and damage. Her quick card has 3 hits, her arts cards have 2 hits, and her buster cards have 1 hit, and her extra attack has 6 hits. She has True Neutral and Man attribute, and her alternate class is Assassin. Her first skill is High Performance Mode A, which increases her arts and buster performances by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and her MP generation rate by 20 to 30%, also for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Multi-Purpose Android B+, which grants her offensive class advantage attributes against Lancers and Rulers for 3 turns, gains 10 to 20 stars, and produces 10 to 20 stars every turn for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Memories of Judgment Day EX, which grants herself invulnerability for 3 hits, 3 turns, increases her own attack by 30 to 50% for 3 attacks, 3 turns, and increases her own anti-humanoid damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B, which increases her own arts performance and star gen by 8%, Magic Resistance B, which increases her own debuff resistance by 17.5%, Independent Action B, which increases her own crit damage by 8%, Apex Predator A, which further increases her crit damage by 10%, and this effect is increased by an additional 5% for every additional servant deployed with Roboko, who also possesses this passive, and ASMR B-, which increases her own healing power by 16%. Her NP is King, which is a 10-hit single-target buster NP that first grants Roboko Ignore Defense for 1 turn, then deals 600 to 1000% damage. It also reduces their defense by 30 to 50% for 3 turns as its overcharge effect, and has a 50 to 100% chance to instant kill them. Her Bond CE is Next Wednesday, which grants her permanent debuff immunity and 30% increased NP damage. Also, once per battle, Roboko can rewind the fight back 1 turn and reset the party's skill cooldowns instantly. Roboko is a full-on DPS archer with a ton of her own buffs and crit stars that she needs to do damage, a very straightforward servant with a very clear role. Her notable mechanic is her offensive class advantage against Lancers and Rulers. This lets you bring her into fights that have enemies from those classes that you wouldn't bring other archers into. Note that although Roboko does get double damage against those classes, she does not get defensive class advantage. This means that Lancers still deal double damage back to Roboko, so if you still want to use her to fight enemy Lancers, you better be confident that she can end the fight within those 3 turns that her buff is active, because otherwise she'll be back to just being a regular archer who gets wrecked by Lancers, as should be the case due to standard class advantage. While servants with more complicated kits can oftentimes do more interesting things, as you'll see throughout this video, more often than not, it's great to have simpler servants who have single utility effects so you don't find yourself hesitating on using those skills at certain points in a fight because you can't decide whether or not you want to use them for one of their effects or the other at that point in time. Really, the only thing Roboko's missing is crit damage, so she'll appreciate getting some crit damage buffs from her teammates. Next is the Elite Miko, Sakura Miko. She's a caster with 13,500 HP, 9,350 attack, and 0.35% MP charge on attack. She has the standard triple arts deck for casters with a 3-hit quick card, 5-hit arts cards, 3-hit buster card, and 5-hit extra attack. She's chaotic neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are archer and ruler. Her first skill is FAC EX, which completely eliminates her own star weight. Specifically, it sets all the star weight values of her cards to 0. It also applies a unique FAC U buff to all allies for 3 turns, which grants them a crit damage buff that gets stronger the more times the team crits in total, up to 5 times. It starts off with a 10% crit damage buff that scales up to 30% at level 1, and at max level, the buff starts at 50% and scales up to 100% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Elite Shrine Maiden A, which decreases her own debuff resistance by 100% for 1 turn as a demerit, but increases all allies' dominant card type performance, which is determined by their NP types, by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and also grants them all a unique Elite status for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Transient Existence Sakura EX, which reduces her own HP by 3500 as a demerit, but her HP cannot go down past 1 as a result of this. In exchange, she grants herself true invulnerability for 1 turn, which means it can't be ignored by Invul Pierce effects or be removed by buff removal effects, and she has a chance to grant her allies 1-hit invulnerability as well that scales from 60 to 100% on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual A, which increases her own arts performance and star gen by 10%, Lava Phobia A++, which increases her damage taken by burn demerits by 100%, Eroge Protagonist B, which increases her own charm resistance by 80%, and Sakura Construction A, which increases party arts performance and healing received by 10%. Her NP is Sakura Kaze, which is a support and utility arts NP that produces 30 to 50 stars and removes the party's debuffs. If allies have the elite status currently active on them, this NP reduces their skill cooldowns by 1 and increases their attack by 50% for their next attack. It also heals the party for 3000 to 5000 HP as its overcharge. And her Bond CE is Gateway to Paradise, which increases all allies' healing received by 35%. If Miko is currently deployed with Pekora, both of their skill cooldown durations are permanently reduced by 1. Miko P is a crit support caster who puts demerits on herself as a trade-off to give her team very powerful buffs. One of her debuffs, the one on her first skill that reduces her own star weight, is actually considered team support, as it better allows her teammates to gather crit stars for themselves, since Miko doesn't really need them most of the time as she's a support type, not a DPS type. The other debuffs too aren't actually that bad to deal with either. Miko can deal with the debuff resist debuff on her second skill on her own thanks to her NP's cleanse, and the HP loss on her third skill is mostly accounted for with the heal on her NP's overcharge effect. Just know that while it's unlikely, they can put Miko into a tough spot, so you do need to be aware of when her demerits actually might come back to burn her. The biggest hurdle in Miko's kit, other than the other demerits that her skills have, is the fact that Miko can only support 1 round of crits because the only part of her profile that makes stars at all is her NP, and while she can spam it to a certain degree, she can't spam it so much that she can single-handedly supply her team with a consistent amount of stars under normal circumstances. She needs help from her teammates to keep generating stars so that her teammates can make the most use out of her buffs. Last is the psychopath Hoshimachi Suisei. She's another Avenger with 11,000 HP, 13,500 attack, and 0.75% MP charge on attack. She has a 2A 2B deck with a 5-hit quick, 2-hit arts, 1-hit buster, and a 3-hit extra. She's lawful evil and star attribute, and her alternate classes are caster, assassin, berserker, and foreigner. Her first skill is Idol of Many Talents A, which grants herself guts for 1 time that revives her with 1,000 to 3,000 HP, 3 turns, increases her own MP damage by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, increases her attack by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and increases her crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Suikopath EX, which grants herself debuff immunity and Invul Pierce for 3 turns, and inflicts Paranoia onto all enemies for 1 time 3 turns. Paranoia is a custom effect that behaves like Terror in that every turn, enemies affected by it have a chance to have their MP sealed for 1 turn. Paranoia has a 60 to 80% chance to activate its MP sealed debuff, and this skill has a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Indomitable Idol A, which charges her own MP gauge by 20 to 30%, increases her own arts performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and grants herself an On Guts Activate buff for 5 turns. This buff triggers when any Guts effect that Suisei has activates, and it increases her own Buster performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and gives her the ability to choose between an Arts and Buster MP type for the rest of the battle. All this on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B+, which increases her own arts performance and star gen by 9%, Avenger Idol A, which increases her MP generation rate when taking damage by 20%, and reduces all ally star gen including sub-members by 10% except herself as a demerit, Oblivion Correction Idol A, which increases her own crit damage and defense by 10%, Self-Replenishment Virtual C, which charges her own MP gauge by 2.5% every turn, and increases her healing received by 5%, Mana's Enhancement EX, which increases her Buster performance by 12%, Starlight Fate EX, which charges her own MP gauge by 5% whenever she attacks with Buster cards, T-Spin A++, which increases her own arts performance by 10% and grants her arts cards Ignore Evade, Comet Sojourn EX, which increases her max HP by 500 every 3 turns with a maximum of 10 stacks, and Red Obsession A+, which increases both Suisei's and Callie's arts performance and defense by 20% if the two are deployed together. Her NP is the Day Takeoff, which is a 4-hit single target arts NP that deals 900 to 1500% damage as an arts type depending on MP level, or 600 to 1000% damage as a Buster type depending on MP level. It also grants her another Guts effect that can stack with all other Guts effects for 1 time 5 turns, and it revives her with 1 HP if triggered. This NP also reduces its target's arts and Buster resistances by 20 to 40% for 3 turns depending on overcharge level. Her Bond CE is Tokyo Budokan, which increases Suisei's max HP by 5,000 permanently and grants her another 2 stacks of Guts that can also stack with all other Guts effects, and they both revive her with 1 HP when used. Suisei is also another DPS servant, as Avengers in FGO typically are meant to be, except for Asuki from before, I guess. Her biggest drawback is that she has extremely low HP since Avengers are meant to be glass cannons, so to make up for that, she has multiple Guts that keep her alive while she does as much damage as possible. Her Comet Sojourn passive should slowly give her more and more HP, but only if you can keep her alive for that long. Her third skill has an effect that gives her a Buster MP type option as soon as any one of her Guts, whether her own or a Gut stack that's given to her by a teammate, is used up, and a Buster buff to go along with it. Her MP type is actually Arts by default, as I mentioned before, but this special effect, when activated, can give her the ability to use both Arts Braid Chains and Buster Braid Chains whenever she gets the right cards for that. One more thing to note about Suisei's kit is her attack rating. The highest base attack stat in the game for any servant is Jolter with 13,244. Suisei's base attack rating beats it by more than 250 points, which would dethrone Jolter as the strongest base attack servant in the game. This is because Avengers have class advantage against the rulers, but the problem is that ruler enemies are very rare in the game, as are most extra classes to begin with. So Suisei has an absurdly high attack rating to partially make up for the fact that she's usually not going to have an attack advantage against most of the enemies you use her against. That and the fact that she's supposed to be a glass cannon and has really low HP, so she kinda needs to have a really high attack rating to make up for that too. Just don't introduce Suisei to Ibaraki. The Banana Oni still hasn't gotten over the trauma that she has from getting bullied by Jolter from the first year of the game. Surprise! It's a second Suisei servant profile. I had so many ideas for Suisei's Avenger profile that I wasn't able to fit there, so I decided to make a second profile for her that could take those ideas that I couldn't use on her as an Avenger. There will be a couple VTubers throughout this video that also have multiple servant profiles, and they're meant to show you how different they can be from one class to another. Here as an assassin, Suisei has 12,400 HP, 11,900 attack, and 0.80% MP charge on attack, but only 0.40% just for her NP alone. She has the same deck as her Avenger self, but she has a 4-hit quick, 2-hit arts, 5-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She is Chaotic Evil this time, but is still a star attribute, and her alternate classes are Caster, Berserker, Avenger, and Thorn. Her first skill is Heartstealer B, which decreases one enemy's insta-kill resist by 60 to 100% for 3 turns, and increases her crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 times on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Winter is Coming A+, which applies Taunt onto one ally for 1 turn, increases her own star absorption by 300 to 600% for 1 turn, and increases her crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Lockdown A, which has a 30 to 50% chance to stun one enemy for 1 turn. This chance is increased by 20 to 30% if the target is a servant, and it is further increased by another 30 to 50% if the target is also an idol type. It also produces 20 to 30 stars and grants Suisei a critical star regeneration buff that produces 10 to 20 stars every turn for 5 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. The passives that she shares with her Avenger form are Territory Creation, Madness Enhancement, Starlight Fate, T-Spin, Comet Sojourn, and Red Obsession. She loses her Avenger, Oblivion Correction, and Self-Replenishment passives since they are exclusive to the Avenger class, but she gains Cloak A, which increases her own star gem by 10% and grants her Evade for 1 attack whenever she uses her Quick card, and 47 Assassinations A, which increases the crit chance of any of her cards that already has an 80% chance or higher to crit all the way up to 100%. Her NP is Ghost, which is a 5-hit arts NP that first increases her own star gen by 150% and her arts performance by 30%, both for 1 turn, then deals 900 to 1500% damage to 1 enemy. It also grants Suisei True Invulnerability for 1 to 5 attacks, and has a 50 to 100% chance to insta-kill its target depending on overcharge level. Her Bond CE is the Invisible Stars in the City Sky, which increases party crit chance by 10% and crit damage by 50%. While Suisei is still very much so a DPS servant even as an assassin, she focuses much more heavily on crits than her Avenger form does, thanks to all the crit damage buffs that she's got. However, she heavily relies on crits for her damage output since she only has 1 color buff and no other general attack buff that her Avenger form has, so if she's not critting, you probably would have been better off bringing Avenger Suisei instead. Also, I didn't mention this in her Avenger profile, but Suisei would very much so appreciate it if you put her on the same team as Callie. Just don't tell Kiara what she's gonna be up to. Alright, done with 0 Gen, now into Gen 1. First up is YouTube's favorite vampire, Yozora Mel, who's an assassin with 16,000 HP and 9,500 attack. She's got 0.30% MP charge on attack, and she's neutral good with a 2Q 2A deck that's got 4-hit quick cards, 6-hit arts cards, a 4-hit buster card, and a 5-hit extra attack. She is Earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Caster and Shielder. Her first skill is Hemophobia C+, which increases an enemy's MP gauge by 1 as a demerit, but it increases her own MP gauge too by 30 to 50% and increases her star gem by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is the Ultimate Forbidden Technique EX, which increases her own defense by 20% for 1 turn, further increases her defense by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and grants her Defense Ignore Resistance for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Bandpire A+, which taunts all enemies for 1 turn and produces 10 to 20 stars on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B, which increases her arts performance and star gen by 8%, Dual Wielding Shield EX, which makes it so that Mel must use her skills twice before they enter cooldown, Presence Concealment D, which increases her star gen further by 4%, ASMR A-, which increases her healing power by 19%, Vampire's Luck A, which gives her a 50% chance to block an incoming debuff, and this is calculated separately from debuff resistance buffs, and Magic Resistance B, which increases her debuff resistance by 17.5%. Her NP is Awaken Mel, which is a quick install and support NP that removes all debuffs from herself, taunts all enemies for 1 turn, and increases her own max HP by 2,000 to 4,000, and the party's attack by 30 to 50% both for 3 turns depending on MP level. Its overcharge effects grant Mel 2 on-attack activate buffs. One gives her a 40 to 60% chance to charm her target when attacking with any card, and the other gives her another 40 to 60% chance to reduce her target's MP charge by 1 when attacking with any card. It also increases party attack by another 20 to 40% and their MP gen by 20 to 40%, all depending on overcharge level. And her Bond CE is Acerola Cherry Juice, which grants her debuff immunity for 5 times, no limit, and increases her party's debuff success rate by 30%. If she's deployed with Choco, it also increases both of all of the support and utility effects by 20%. Mel is a defensive support and utility assassin with a special gimmick of being able to use all of her skills twice before they enter their cooldown phases, which is unique to her. This gives her some interesting skill uses. For example, she can instantly charge her NP in 1 turn at max level, or give herself a 100% defense for 1 turn, or pop 40 stars instantly in 1 turn for the team to use. Note that certain effects like her defense, ignore, resist, and her taunt can't stack if you use their skills twice in the same turn. But Mel can also use his skills 2 turns in a row instead, which gives her more strategies like being able to taunt 3 turns in a row if she also uses her NP after her skill taunts. Mel's Bond CE is also an interesting one because of her team buff with Choco. It means that with this CE equipped and with Choco as a teammate, Mel can give a maximum of a 110% attack buff by herself for 3 turns. I wasn't kidding when I said I wanted to make Bond CEs really strong. Next is the first of our half-elves in Hololive, Aki Rosenthal, who's a foreigner, and before you ask, yes, there is actually a class in FGO called Foreigner when it should have been called Outsider instead, because it's a bit of a yikes for a Japanese studio to call blonde-haired girls foreigners. In any case, she's got 14,000 HP, 11,500 attack, and 0.60% MP charge on attack. She's lawful good with a caster deck of triple arts cards that have a 2-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 1-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. Her attribute is Earth, and her alternate classes are Caster, Ruler, and Alter Ego. Her first skill is Belly Dancer A, which increases her own debuff success rate by 20 to 40% for 3 turns, and has a 60 to 80% chance to charm all enemies for 1 turn on a 6 to 4 turn cooldown. Her second skill is a Half-Elf's Preference A-, which increases party attack and arts performance by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, and further increases all foreigner allies' attack and arts performance by another 10 to 20% for 3 turns, including herself on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Legacy of Galactic Heroes EX, which grants her invulnerability for 3 attacks with no limit, and increases her MP damage by 20 to 30% for 3 times on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. These effects refresh if Aki still has stacks upon repeat use. Her passive skills are Territory Creation Virtual B, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 8%, Existence Outside the Domain C, which produces 2 stars every turn and increases her own debuff resistance by 6%, Support from the Unknown EX, which further increases her own debuff success rate by 5% for every foreigner on the field with Aki, and this passive counts herself too. She also has Mixed Blood Chalice, which charges her own MP gauge by 5% and heals her for 500 HP every turn, Worldwide Rosatai EX, which increases her arts performance by 5% for every non-Japanese servant in her team, and increases her max HP by 500 for every Japanese servant in her team, and these effects apply even to Aki's teammates in the backline, ASMR C, which increases her own healing power by 12%, and Life is 9% Alcohol A, which increases her own defense by 20% when debuffed. Her NP is Shalies, which is a 5-hit AoE arts NP that removes party debuffs first, then deals 450 to 750% damage to all enemies, and then heals the party for a flat 3000 HP. It also deals an extra 150 to 200% damage to all charmed enemies. Her Bond CE is A World Different From Your Own, which increases party arts performance and MP damage by 15%, but these effects are doubled for all foreigners on the front line with Aki, which also includes herself. Aki is a support DPS foreigner who supports other foreigners, so if your favorite servant is also a foreigner, preferably an arts foreigner, Aki's gonna be a great teammate for them. Also, take a shot every time I say foreigner, which sounds like a drinking game Aki would like. Aki's main DPS strategy is to combo the charm on her first skill with her NP that deals extra damage to enemies that are charmed. but since her charm only lasts for 1 turn and she needs to wait a minimum of 4 turns to get the skill back, it could be a good idea to bring other servants with their own charm skills, or at least maybe teammates who have skill cooldown reduction effects. But even in situations where she can't deal much damage, her NP also has team utility like a heal and a party debuff cleanse, so Aki overall has a nice and simple game plan of just charging her NP and spamming it as much as possible to support her team, foreigner or not. Next is our favorite schizophrenic VTuber, Akai Hato and Hachama, and oh boy, this is gonna be interesting. She's a foreigner, alter ego, and a berserker all at the same time, kinda like a printer, scanner, and fax machine all in one. She has 12,500 HP, 12,000 attack, and 0.60% MP charge on attack when she's a foreigner and a berserker, but only 0.30% MP charge on attack when she's an alter ego. She's chaotic evil as a foreigner, then chaotic insane as both alter ego and berserker. As a foreigner, she has a lancer deck of 2 quick cards and 2 buster cards. As an alter ego, she has a berserker deck with triple buster cards, and as a berserker, she has a more balanced 2 arts 2 buster deck. Her foreigner and berserker decks both have 4 hits on all of their cards, while her alter ego deck has 8 hits on all of its cards. Both Hato and Hachama are man attribute, and they have no alternative classes. First, Hato's skills as a foreigner. Her first skill is Red Heart C, which heals one ally for 1,000 and 3,000 HP, and also heals herself for the same amount on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Emotional Dilution B-, which produces 5 to 15 stars, but decreases her own attack by 30 to 10% for 3 turns as a buff on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Echo D+, which grants herself a unique Echo status for 5 turns. Echo gives Hato a special guts effect for 1 time with no time limit that revives her with a percentage of her HP that scales from 50 to 100% based on skill level, and it also applies on her an on guts activate effect that changes her class to alter ego and changes her name to Hachama, all this on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 12%, and Mental Flux A, which grants her mental debuff immunity. These 2 are passives that apply to Hato no matter what form she's in, but she gets 2 additional passives that are only active when she's still a foreigner, which are Existence Outside the Domain EX, which produces 2 stars every turn and increases her debuff resistance by 12%, and Insanity C, which increases her buster performance by 6%. Her NP is a support quick NP called Chama, which taunts all enemies for 3 turns, grants herself a crit star regeneration buff that produces 10 to 20 stars every turn for 3 turns, but decreases her own defense by 50% for 3 turns as a buff. It also increases party crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. Her first skill as an alter ego is Hato Basic EX, which heals herself for 2,000 to 4,000 HP, charges her own MP gauge by 20 to 30%, decreases all enemies' debuff resistance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns as a buff, and does the same for her own party for 3 turns as a buff as well on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Yummy Yummy EX, which grants herself debuff immunity for 3 turns and increases her attack and defense by 20 to 30% each for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. And her third skill is the Red Court B+, which grants herself a unique red curse buff that causes all of her normal attacks to inflict a bleed status on her targets that deals 2,000 to 4,000 damage every turn for 3 turns and increases her own MP generation rate by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. The passives Hachama gets as an alter ego are Item Construction C, which increases her own debuff success rate by 6%, and Dependent Manifestation A, which increases her own insta-kill success rate by 20% and makes it so that all of her attacks decrease Hato's attack by 4% each permanently. This passive also establishes both Hachama and Berserker Hato as 2 separate entities, which means that they both have separate health pools, skill cooldowns, and MP gauges. Her MP is which is an 8-hit single-target buster NP that first grants her a special guts for 1 time, no limit, that reverts her back to Akai Hato when triggered, but changes her class to Berserker and revives her with full HP, then deals 600 to 1000% damage to one enemy, and deals an extra 200% damage to them if they have a bleed status active. It also heals Hachama for 2000 to 3000 HP, and has a 50 to 100% chance to insta-kill its target. Now onto her Berserker skills. Akai Hato Berserker's first skill is Red Heart EX, which removes all debuffs from herself, life steals 1000 to 3000 HP from one ally, and then further heals herself for another 1000 to 3000 HP on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Emotional Dilution EX, which grants her invulnerability for 1 turn, ignores defensive class advantage for 3 turns, increases her own attack by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and increases her own star absorption by 4000 to 8000% for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Nightmare EX, which grants herself a unique Nightmare status for 5 turns as a debuff. It gives her a special Guts effect for 1 time no limit that switches her back to Alter Ego, changes her name back to Hachama, and revives her at 40 to 80% of her max HP when triggered. It also applies another unique status called Stress to all enemies and allies. On enemies, it increases the crit damage they take from your servants by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. On allies, Stress has an increasing chance to inflict a heart attack every turn for 3 turns. At level 1, it has a 10 to 30% chance to induce a heart attack, and at level 10, it has a 20 to 40% chance to do the same. A heart attack will instantly reduce its target's HP to 1, but stress will be removed immediately if a heart attack is successfully activated. But if that ally was already at 10% of their max HP or lower when they suffer a heart attack, it will apply instant death on them instead. Hato's passives as a berserker are Red Enhancement A+, which increases her own buster performance by 11%, and directly increases her own crit rate by 10%, effectively giving all of her normal attacks base 10% chance to crit, even without any crit stars. And Coexistence EX, which grants Hachima 1 hit of evasion, and a 1-turn skill cooldown reduction when Berserker Hato changes back to Hachama. Her NP is Chama, which is an offensive utility arts NP that has a 500% chance to stun all enemies for 1 turn, apply a 1-time buff block on them all, and decrease their attack and defense by 30 to 50% each for 3 turns. It also gives herself a star regen buff that produces 20 to 40 stars every turn for 3 turns. Her Bond CE, which is shared across all of Hachama's forms, is Spider Lily, which grants her party insta-kill immunity, increases both Foreigner and Berserker Hato's arts performance by 30%, and increases Alter Ego Hachama's buster performance by 30%. It also increases the attack and crit damage of her team if they are afflicted with Hato's stress debuff by 30% each. Hato has by far the most complicated profile in this entire video. I'm not even sure if the people who play FGO regularly watching this right now even understand what's going on here, but that's the same feeling we all had when we watched Hachama's Nightmare arc, so same difference. Basically, Hachama has 3 forms. Her base Foreigner form is actually very weak. Specifically, her skills are quite subpar, especially considering all the other skills we've seen so far. Only her NP has legitimately good effects, but its intended use is to force Akai Hato to take enough damage to trigger the special guts on her 3rd skill to turn her into Alter Ego Hachama. Once she's an Alter Ego is when she gets things going. Notably, her bleed debuff gives her NP much higher damage, and her deck changes to a triple buster setup that makes her normal attacks have much higher damage output. But that's not all. Hachama's MP has another special guts that, when activated, reverts her back to Akai Hato, but this time she comes back as a berserker and her skills are much better this time too. Notably, she gets a unique stress debuff that can have a serious impact on your gameplay since it's such a double-edged sword. On the subject of stress, it can be removed with debuff removal, so you don't have to deal with it if you don't want to, and note that Hachama herself is also immune to it. Hachama and Berserker Hato can keep switching to each other as long as they have their special guts up at the time they take fatal damage, though it's gonna be a bit of a challenge for Hachama to turn into Hato because of her triple buster deck, and vice versa because of Hato's Berserker class. Also note that Hachama and Berserker Hato actually have separate health pools, skill cooldowns, and MP gauges. This also means that when one form receives buffs or debuffs, the other one does not, with the one exception being Hachama's Dependent Manifestation passive. But both of their skill cooldowns still count down even if they're not on the field. So the idea is that Akai Hato must turn into Hachama first and foremost, because if somehow she doesn't activate her special guts to do that and gets killed without it, she can't turn into Hachama at all and is just gone. But once she becomes Hachama, in essence, as long as both Hachama and Hato can keep using their special guts and keep switching to each other, they are effectively immortal. However, as soon as one of them hits 0 HP without any guts to save them, both of them are gone for good, just like any other servant. Next is everyone's favorite friend, Shirogane Fubuki, but she's not alone. She's also brought Kurokami with her, and together they're an archer with 14,300 HP and 10,500 attack. They have 0.55% MP charge on attack with a 2A2B deck that's got a 3-hit quick, 5-hit arts, 1-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. Shirogane is chaotic good, while Kurokami is chaotic neutral, and they're both sky attribute. Their alternate classes are Saber, Caster, Assassin, Berserker, and Alter Ego. Shirogame's first skill is Two-Faced Fox B, which switches her to Kurokami Fubuki and increases Kurokami's attack by 0 to 50% for 3 turns on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. If Shirogane uses the skill twice in a battle, this attack buff for Kurokami is now permanent, and if she uses it 3 times, it also permanently increases her own attack by the same amount. Of note, if an enemy uses a buff removal effect on them, then they'll only lose one stage of the buff's progression rather than losing it entirely, and Shirogane just needs to use the skill again to restore whatever stage of buff that she lost. Her second skill is Whiteout A-, which grants the team a whiteout buff for 1 turn, which reduces all their damage taken to 0 and increases their MP generation rate when taking damage by 50%. Yes, this works even though they don't technically take any damage. It also removes party debuffs and heals them for 1500 to 2500 HP on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Fox's Friendship EX, which increases one ally's arts performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and converts all of the cards in that ally's deck into arts cards for 3 turns. If Shirogane uses this skill on herself, then she only converts her own deck, but not Kurokami's. It also charges their MP gauge by 20 to 30%, and if she uses the skill on any Silver Fox allies, she further charges their MP gauge by another flat 30% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Kurokami's first skill is also called Two-Faced Fox B, but her version switches her back to Shirogane Fubuki and increases Shirogame's defense by 0 to 50% for 3 turns. Just like Shirogame's first skill, this defense buff is permanent for Shirogane upon its second activation, and Kurokami also gives herself this buff permanently on its third activation. It behaves the same way when it comes to buff removal effects, also with a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Blackout A+, which has a 500% chance to inflict a blackout debuff on all enemies for 1 turn, which reduces their attack completely to 0. It also grants the team Ignore Evasion for 3 turns, and increases their anti-humanoid damage by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Fox's Trickery EX, which increases one ally's buster performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and also converts that ally's entire deck into buster cards for 3 turns. If she uses it on herself, only Kurokami's deck will be converted. It also charges their MP gauge by another 20 to 30% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Their passives are Magic Resist C, which increases their own debuff resist by 15%, Independent Action EX, which increases their crit damage by 12%, Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases their arts performance and star gen by 12%, Ventriloquism Meme EX, which grants them 500% Skill Seal resistance, Fox Burger King A, which increases their healing received from Western servants by 20%, and I'm Not a Cat A, which decreases the damage they take from Berserker enemies by 20%. They also have Apex Predator A, which increases their crit damage by 10%, and increases that effect further by an additional 5% for every servant deployed with them, who also has the same base passive, Speedrunner B, which increases their MP generation rate by 10%, Divinity C, which increases their damage by 150, and Bakatara A, which increases Fubuki's, Watame's, and Flare's buster, arts, and quick performance by 20% if any combination of them are deployed together. Shirakame's NP is Voidwalker, which is a 5-hit AoE arts NP that deals 450 to 750% damage to all enemies, and then increases her party's defense by 30% for 3 turns. It also charges her party's MP gauges by 25 to 50%. Kurokami's NP is also called Voidwalker, but this time it's a 5-hit single target buster MP that first decreases all enemies' defense by 30%. Yes, I said that right. And then deals 600 to 1000% damage to one enemy. It also inflicts MP seal onto that enemy for 1 to 5 turns depending on overcharge level. Their bond CE is Fanfare, and when Shirogane is active with it, it increases her MP damage by 30% and adds a 1-turn skill cooldown reduction effect to her third skill. If Kurokami is active with it, it also increases her MP damage by 30%, but it decreases all enemies' debuff resistance by 50% instead. Fubuki is also another stance character, just not as complicated as Hachama, thank fucking god. The difference with them is that while their skill sets are also independent of each other, they both share the same HP pool and MP gauge. This also means that whatever buffs or debuffs that one of them had will also apply to the other if they switch, except for the ones that don't specifically carry over, of course. This means that Fubuki can use her entire skill set, both Shirokami's and Kurokami's, in one turn if she wants to, though that won't be very efficient given the nature of their third skills. But she can give one ally an 80% battery in one turn, and that's worth mentioning. It's still generally a better idea to spread out her buffs though, so that her team can put her buffs to use as best they can, and for as long as possible. Last thing to mention here is that Shirokami's whiteout buff counters enemy invul pierce effects, since it's technically not invulnerability, so keep that in mind. And last is the Band-Aid VTuber named Natsuiro Matsuri, who's a berserker with 12,000 HP, 12,500 attack, and 0.90% MP charge on attack. She's got a Lancer deck with 2 quicks and 2 busters that have 7-hit quicks, a 2-hit arts, 1-hit busters, and a 6-hit extra. She's a man attribute, and her alternate classes are Archer and Ruler. Her first skill is I Am Hololive C+, which increases her buster and quick performance by 10 to 20% for 3 attacks. The buster and quick buffs are considered separate stacks, and they have no limit on a 4 to 2 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Band-Aid Warrior A, which grants herself evasion for 3 attacks 5 turns, grants herself ignore evasion for 3 attacks 5 turns, and increases her own crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 attacks 5 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is the Trouble with Matsuri A++, which reduces all allies' debuff resistance except herself by 30% for 3 turns, and reduces her own defense by 30% for 3 attacks 5 turns as debuffs. However, it also gives Matsuri Ignore Invulnerability for 3 attacks 5 turns, increases her own star absorption by 3,000 to 6,000% for 1 turn, and charges her MP gauge by 20 to 30% on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual A+, which increases her own arts performance and star gem by 11%, a Summer's Reservation EX, which reduces her own charm resistance by 500% as a demerit, a Summer's Part-Time Job A, which grants herself stun immunity, a Friend to All Idols A, which grants all idol-type servants on the field with her a 20% chance to cleanse their most recent debuff from themselves at the end of your turn, Apex Predator A, which increases her own crit damage by 10%, with this effect gaining an additional 5% for every servant deployed with Matsuri, who also possesses this passive, and Mad Enhancement D, which increases her own buster performance by 4%. Her NP is I Am God, which is a 7-hit AoE quick NP that deals 600 to 1000% damage to all enemies, then removes all their buffs and inverts her own defensive class disadvantage for 3 turns. It also increases her party's attack by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, which activates first before the MP does damage. Her Bond CE is A Little Sister's Impossible Wish, which increases her own offensive class advantage scaling from 50% to 80%. And unique to Matsuri, she has a second Bond CE called From a Not So Special Fan. It increases her damage against evil enemies by 100% and also grants her permanent class disadvantage inversion against them. Matsuri is a survival DPS berserker. The idea behind her profile is that she's a berserker who doesn't do that much damage at first, but if you give her time to build up her NP, get multiple stacks of her first skill that has an extremely short cooldown, and give her stars to put her crit damage buffs to use, her damage potential can get insanely high. She also has survival effects like a 3-hit evade and a defensive class inversion effect on her NP that go a long way to keep her alive so that she can reach that damage potential. Alright, first gen done, let's go to second gen. First is the gaming onion, Minato Aqua. She's a rider with 14,200 HP, 25,500 attack, and 0.80% MP charge on attack. She has a full berserker deck with triple buster cards that have a 3-hit quick, a 2-hit arts, 4-hit busters, and a 3-hit extra. She's chaotic neutral and man attribute, and her alternate classes are archer, assassin, and berserker. Her first skill is Marksmanship Aqua A+, which increases her own crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, increases her own attack by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, and grants herself evasion for 1 turn on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Shut-In Maid B, which seals her own MP for 1 turn as a buff, but grants herself an on-attack activate buff, No Limit, which increases her own buster performance by 20-30% for 1 turn when attacking with buster cards, and this effect activates first before she uses her first buster card of the turn on a 4 to 2 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Phelan Angel EX, which charges her own MP gauge by 20-30% and grants herself a unique Phelan Angel buff for 3 turns, which charges the party's MP gauges by 5-15% whenever Aqua attacks with buster cards. This skill also removes any MP seal effect from her, both debuffs and buffs, and if an MP seal is successfully removed this way, it further grants Aqua an Ignore Invul buff for 1 turn and increases her attack by another 50-100% for 1 turn on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 12%, Gamer Maid B+, which increases her debuff resist by 15% and increases her own star absorption by 100%, Apex Predator A+, which increases her own crit damage by 12% and further increases that amount by 5% for every additional servant deployed with Aqua who possesses the same base passive, Speedrunner B, which increases her own MP generation rate by 10%, and Akukin Construction A, which increases party buster performance by 10%. Her last passive is Hololive Resistance B+, which increases her own defense by 30% and crit chance resistance by 20% when her HP falls below 50%. But if Sora is deployed with Aqua and uses her So You're the Enemy skill, it negates the aforementioned buffs, but increases Aqua's attack by 30% and grants her HP regen by 2000 HP every turn for as long as Sora's third skill lasts. Her NP is Promise to the Sunflower, which is a 10-hit single-target buster NP that deals 600 to 1000% damage to one enemy and increases her own crit damage by 100 to 200% as its overcharge. However, if Aqua is deployed with at least 2 other Idol-type servants, her NP's damage scaling is improved to 800 to 1200% damage instead. Her Bond CE is a warm watercolor palette which has the following effects. Aqua's critical hits now remove the most recent debuff that she has and heal her for 2000 HP each. If she's deployed with Murasaki Shion, both have their attack and defense increased by 20%, and if she's deployed with Nekomata Okayu, both of them have their base skill cooldowns reduced by 1, and Okayu receives 50% increased debuff success chance. Aqua is an incredibly strong DPS rider whose gimmick lies in her second skill whose buster buff can stack. This means that in order to tap into Aqua's max DPS potential, you need to avoid using Aqua's buster cards and keep using her second skill that has an extremely short cooldown to stack as many buster buffs on her as you can so that you can use them all at once when she has the perfect setup. The challenge in this is that her deck is mostly buster cards, so it'll be tough trying to stack a lot of buster buffs on her since you're likely to be forced to use one of Aqua's buster cards at some point. But her bigger issue is her lack of crit stars in her own kit, seeing that she's a crit rider, so just like Roboco from before, Aqua wants teammates who can provide the stars that she needs to crit people out of existence. Next is the Kusogaki Murasaki Shion. She's a caster with 15,300 HP, 9,800 attack, and 0.45% MP charge on attack. She's got a 2Q2A deck with 4-hit quicks, 4-hit arts, a 4-hit buster, and a 5-hit extra. She's chaotic neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate class is rider. Her first skill is Oversleeper B++, which removes her own debuffs and heals her for 3,000 to 5,000 HP. It also applies a delayed buff on her allies except herself that, after 1 turn, does the same for them with a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Wave of a Pleasant Dream A, which decreases all enemies' attack by 10 to 30% for 3 turns, and increases her own party's quick and arts performance by 10 to 20% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Diary of Murasaki Shion D, which grants herself a unique status for 10 turns. This status grants her an exclusive MP burst buff at the end of your turn, every turn for as long as the status is active, and the MP burst buff itself increases her MP damage by 0 to 10% for 1 time. This skill also increases party debuff success rate by 20-30% for 5 turns, and increases the party's buff removal resistance by 100% for 1 time 5 turns. All this on a 12 to 10 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B+, which increases her own arts performance and star gen by 9%, Harvard graduate self-proclaimed A, which increases her own MP gen by 15%, and Item Construction B+, which increases her own debuff success rate by 9%. Her last passive is Teasing Violet C+, which grants a random buff to all Idol-type servants deployed with her that lasts for 3 turns at a time before rotating to another buff, and the possible buffs this can give are a 10% attack buff, 10% defense buff, 10% MP gen buff, 10% star gen buff, 10% MP damage buff, 10% debuff resistance buff, or a one-time debuff immunity. Her NP is Kusoga Kick, which is a 6-hit AoE quick NP that first increases the party's quick and arts performance by 20% each for 3 turns, increases her own MP gen by 50% for 3 turns, and increases her own attack by 10% for 1 turn for every stack of MP burst present, then deals 600 to 1000% damage to all enemies. It also has a 500% chance to reduce all enemies' NP damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is Memories of Makai, which grants her permanent ignore invul and causes her a buff to give her 2 stacks of MP burst in a single turn while it's active. If she's deployed with Aqua, both of them have their attack and defense increased by 20%, and this stacks with Aqua's own Bond CE effect. And if she's deployed with Okayu, both of them gain an extra 2000 max HP, and Okayu gains 10% MP charge every turn. Shion is a hybrid DPS and support caster. Her third skill's gimmick is to keep stacking MP damage buffs over a long period of time until you want to use her MP so that it hits like an isekai truck. Just pray that she doesn't miss. It's actually pretty similar to Aqua's own Buster Buff stacking gimmick in concept, but Shion has an easier time using it since her stacks just accumulate on their own over 10 turns, and it's not like she's restricted from using certain cards in her deck while it's going. But of course, the trade-off is that Aqua is a crit rider while Shion isn't. Quick bit of trivia for you, there is actually no caster in FGO right now, the base game that is, who has a quick NP, which would mean that Shion would be the first caster in the game with a quick NP.
1, 2.
Next is everyone's favorite Oni, Nakiri Ayame. She's a saber with 12,500 HP, 12,800 attack, and 0.81% MP charge on attack, but only 0.20% on one of her NPs. She has a standard 2A, 2B deck with a 3-hit quick card, 2-hit arts cards, 2-hit buster cards, and a 4-hit extra. She's neutral good and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are archer and berserker. Her first skill is Demon Goddess Nakiri A, which grants herself a unique Demon Goddess buff for 3 turns. This buff gives her a 60% chance to increase her own attack by 10 to 20% every turn for 3 turns, and she can give herself a maximum of 3 stacks of this attack buff, which have infinite duration if they successfully activate, though enemies can remove them with buff removal effects. If Ayame already has maximum stacks, when she uses this skill again, it will give her a guaranteed 1000 to 2000 HP heal per stack instead on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Nakirium EX, which charges her own MP gauge by 30 to 50%, increases party buff success chance by 20 to 40% for 3 turns, and gains 20 to 30 stars on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Demonize A++, which seals one enemy's NP for 2 turns, reduces their crit chance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and grants herself debuff immunity for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B+, which increases her own arts performance and star gem by 9%, Demon Blood EX, which grants her MP charge loss immunity, Magic Resistance A, which increases her own debuff resistance by 20%, and Apex Predator A+, which increases her own crit damage by 11%, and this effect is increased by an additional 5% for every other servant deployed with Ayame who also has the same base passive. She has 2 more passives. The first one is Killing Moon EX, which increases her arts performance by 30% in any nighttime battles. It also grants her permanent 1.5x attack advantage against Moon Cancer enemies, and this occurs regardless of environmental conditions. Her last passive is AT Field Anti-Emotion B++, which increases Ayame's offensive debuff resistance by 50%, which guards against any debuff that affects her damage output, such as attack debuffs, color debuffs, and MP damage debuffs. This also stacks with regular debuff resistance effects like her Magic Resist passive from earlier. And if Marine is deployed with Ayame and uses her own third skill, this passive converts the Buster buff from Marine's third skill into an arts buff instead of equivalent value. Her NP is Demon Blade Asura Rakshasa, which is a 3-hit AoE arts NP that first increases her own arts performance by 20% for 1 turn, and reduces all enemies' defense by 20% for 3 turns, then deals 450 to 750% damage to all enemies. It then increases her own crit damage by 30 to 50% and grants her 3 stacks of a unique parry buff that reduces incoming damage of enemy normal attacks to 0 and charges her MP gauge by 10 to 30% depending on overcharge level, though her parries do not stack. However, if Ayame's HP is at 50% or less, her MP changes to Onigoroshi, Raging Demon of Makai, which is a 15-hit single target arts NP that first increases her arts performance by 50% and lets her ignore invul for 1 turn, then deals 1200 to 1800% damage to 1 enemy. It also deals 150 to 200% extra damage to evil enemies, increases her crit damage afterwards by 50 to 100% for 3 turns, and grants her 3 stacks of a stronger red parry buff, which behaves the same as a regular parry, but also increases Ayame's buster performance by 20 to 100% per stack for 3 turns depending on overcharge level. And her Bond CE is Asura and Rasetsu, which doubles all of Ayame's normal attack hit counts. Ayame is a ridiculously strong saber, and honestly probably one of the strongest servants I've made for this entire video. What sets her apart from most others here is that she's designed to be a solo saber, who really shines when she's the last one left on your team and needs to clutch a fight on her own. The gimmick that provides much of her ability to do that is her mechanic of having 2 different MPs at the same time, 1 AoE and 1 single target, which is something only 1 other VTuber in this video also has, and is just completely unheard of in FGO as in the actual game. Of note, if Ayame's HP does drop to 50% or less in a fight and her NP changes to its second type, she loses access to her first NP and cannot use it again for the rest of the fight. Usually this doesn't matter, since in a position where Ayame is losing that much HP to begin with, you'd rather have her single target NP anyway, but do keep this in mind. Next is your new favorite nurse, Yuzuki Choco, who is not a succubus, mind you. She's an assassin with 15,000 HP, 10,000 attack, and 0.86% MP charge on attack. She has a standard assassin deck of triple quick cards with 6-hit quicks, a 4-hit arts, a 3-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. She's lawful neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are archer and caster. Her first skill is Head Nurse of Makai Academy A-, which heals the party for 2,000 to 3,000 HP, increases party MP generation rates by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and restores all buffs that have been removed from the party in the last 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. The buffs that she restores this way have the same remaining durations as when they were first removed. Her second skill is Professor of Makai Academy A+, which seals all enemies' NPs for 1 turn, increases party defense by 20 to 40% for 3 turns, and produces 15 to 25 crit stars on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Memories of Makai Choco EX, which increases one ally's MP damage by 30 to 50% for 1 turn, and grants them Ignore Invul for 1 turn. She also increases a different ally's defense by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, though she can put all these effects on the same ally if she wants to on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passes are Territory Creation Virtual B, which increases her own arts performance and star gem by 8%, ASMR EX, which increases her own healing power by 25%, Home Economics A+++, which allows Choco to perform 1 of 2 extra random effects every time she performs a heal. 1, which is to remove all debuffs from the allies receiving Choco's heals, or 2, increase the healing amount by 50%, which stacks with all other healing increase effects that her team may have. Presence Concealment D, which increases her star gem by 4%, Magic Resist C, which increases her debuff resist by 15%, Apex Predator C, which increases her crit damage by 4%, and this effect increases by an additional 5% for every additional servant deployed with Choco, who also has the same base passive, Item Construction A+, which increases her debuff success rate by 11%, and Survival Evolved EX, which produces 5 stars while attacking with Arts, Buster, or Extra cards and reduces her MP damage taken by 30%. Her NP is Choco Sensei's Examination, which is a support and utility arts NP that reduces her own skill cooldowns by 1 turn, grants all allies a unique Demon Kiss buff for 1 time that converts 1 incoming debuff into a buff of equal value instead, and Choco can stack up to 3 of these buffs on the team at the same time, increases the party's crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns, and grants the party HP regen for 5 turns that heals for 1000-2000 HP. It also reduces one enemy's debuff resist and crit chance by 20 to 60%, both for 3 turns depending on overcharge level. And her Bond CE is Butter Chicken Curry with Summer Vegetables, which increases party crit chance resistance by 30%, and their Quicken Arts performance by 20%. If she's deployed with Mel, it also increases both of their Quicken Arts performance by another 30%. Like Mel before her, Choco is also a support assassin with some unorthodox support skills. She has 2 unique mechanics, the first being her first skill's ability to recall buffs that have already been removed from your team. In FGO, the only counter to enemy buff removal effects is, well, buff removal resistance, or preventing your buffs from getting removed in the first place. So once your buffs are gone, there's nothing you can do to get them back, except wait for your skills to come back. Combined with her Demon Kiss mechanic that converts a debuff into a buff, Choco has strong utility counters that no one else can provide, while also supporting a team more normally with crit stars, defense buffs, and heals. She will be a little trickier to use as a support though, due to her full assassin deck and consequent lack of arts cards, so consider using her more as a setup support rather than a dedicated long-term one. And last is everyone's favorite duck and gender-bent isekai protagonist, Oozora Subaru. She's an archer with 14,000 HP, 11,500 attack, and 0.95% MP charge on attack. She's got a Lancer deck with 3-hit quicks, a 3-hit arts, 1-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's chaotic duck and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Berserker, Ruler, and Alter Ego. Subaru's first skill is this read as Yago C+, which changes one enemy's class to any playable class for 1 turn of your choice, and has a 500% chance to seal their skills for 1 turn, reduce their attack by 20 to 30% for 1 turn, and apply a unique confusion debuff onto herself for 3 turns that has a flat 50% chance to stun her once for 1 turn every turn on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Boundless Sunshine EX, which grants herself debuff immunity for 1 time every turn for 3 turns. These debuff immunity effects stack if they are not used up, and Subaru can hold 3 stacks max, and these stacks have no turn limit. This skill also charges party MP gauges by 15 to 25% every turn for 3 turns, and reduces her own star weight to 0 for 3 turns, all on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Swan Song EX, which grants her a unique Swan Song status for 3 turns, increases party MP generation rates by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and grants the party guts for 1 time that stacks with all other guts effects with no limit, and revives them for 3,000 to 5,000 HP when triggered on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passes are Territory Creation Virtual A-, which increases her arts performance in Star Gen by 9.5%, Independent Action C, which increases her crit damage by 6%, Magic Resist E, which increases her debuff resistance by 10%, ASMR E, which increases her own healing power by 6%, Birds of a Feather A, which increases the attack of all bird-type allies deployed with her by 20%, and Oozora Keisatsu A, which grants her a 20% chance to stun evil targets for 1 turn when normal attacking. Her first NP is We Can Win This, which grants the party an on-attack activate buff for 3 turns that heals an ally for 1,000 to 2,000 HP whenever they use normal attacks, and increases party defense by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. It also increases party crit chance resistance by 20 to 40% for 3 turns as its overcharge. Her second NP is Dear You, which first increases party MP overcharge stages by 1 for 1 time, 3 turns, and then grants the party insta-kill immunity for 1 time, 3 turns, heals the party for 10,000 to 15,000 HP, and removes party debuffs. It also charges party MP gauges by 20 to 40% as its overcharge. And her Bond CE is DuckTales, which increases party MP damage by 20%. And if Mio is deployed with Subaru, this CE increases its efficiency by another 20% for a total of 40% extra MP damage. Subaru has the weirdest profile I think I've given anyone in this video. She's a support archer, which by itself isn't unheard of since Fubuki is one too, but she's mainly a defensive support archer, which is strange given the nature of the class as a whole in FGO. But what makes her truly strange is her unique gimmick of changing one enemy's entire class for one turn. Technically, this isn't an attack buff, but since Subaru can control which class she forces an enemy into, you're basically forcing a counterclass situation. This means that with Subaru, you can go into a fight with a team that normally shouldn't be effective due to counterclassing and still come out on top, so long as you do enough damage in that one turn that Subaru provides. And you know how in Ayame's entry I said that there was only one other VTuber in this video who also had 2 MPs at once? Well, I kind of forgot about Subaru, so make that 3 of them who have this feature. In Subaru's case, she gains access to her second NP only when she's used her third skill for the Swan Song buff specifically. In fact, while this buff is active, Subaru actually has access to both of her NPs at once, so that she can choose which one to use depending on the situation and isn't locked into one or the other. Despite all the weirdness with her kit, Subaru does have some incredibly powerful support effects, like the MP charge over time on her second skill and the massive heal on her second NP, so she definitely has a place somewhere on a team in the right situations, though it'll take a little longer to figure out where and how she's supposed to be used. Second gen done, let's go over the gamers. First up is the Wolf Mom Ookami Mio. She's a caster with 13,000 HP, 11,500 attack, and 0.85% MP charge on attack. She's got a standard caster deck of triple arts cards with a 3-hit quick, 2-hit arts, and 1-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. She's lawful good and sky attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Berserker, and Ruler. Her first skill is Wild Dualism B, which increases party arts and buster performance by 20-30% for 3 turns, and further increases her own arts performance by an additional 20% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Wolf's Divination A+, which allows her to choose one of the following buffs to cast on one ally for 3 turns. Increase their attack by 30-50%, increase their MP generation rate by 30-50%, increase their star absorption rate by 3,000 to 6,000%, or increase their crit damage by 30-50%, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Protection of Mother Wolf EX, which increases party defense by 20-30%, further increases the defense of all child type and idol type servants by 20% for 3 turns, heals the party for 2,000 to 3,000 HP, further heals the party for 2,000 HP every turn for 3 turns, and charges the party MP gauges by 10 to 20% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 8%, ASMR C, which increases her own healing power by 12%, Wolf's Luck A, which grants her a 15% chance to automatically gain 10 crit stars every turn, Hatotaris' Protection EX, which reduces her own damage taken by 1000 and grants her a 20% chance to nullify incoming damage completely for every attack that she takes, and Divinity C, which increases her damage by 150. Her NP is Hatotaris the Strongest, which is a 2-hit AoE arts NP that freezes enemy statuses for 1 turn. This means that all enemies cannot act or gain natural MP charge, and the currently applied buffs and debuffs will last 1 more turn because they were frozen. It then deals 450% to 750% damage to them that ignores defense and charges party MP gauges by 20%. It also reduces all enemies' defense afterwards by 20 to 60% depending on overcharge level. Her Bond CE is Sparkle, which increases the party's healing received by 20% and increases party MP generation rates by 20%. It also charges the MP gauges of all idol type servants deploy with Mio by 5% every turn and further charges those of all Hololive gamers by another 5% for a total of 10% MP charge every turn. If Subaru is deployed with Mio, it grants Subaru's third skill an Ignore Invulnerability effect and increases her star gen by 100%. Mama Mio is a straightforward caster hybrid whose main job is to give the team various kinds of buffs, but can also clear mobs with her AoE NP when she needs to. Speaking of her NP, it also has strong utility with a powerful freeze mechanic that actually doesn't exist in FGO proper yet, and a 20% MP charge on top of the 20% that she can already give with her third skill. Naturally, she's best used in a dedicated arts team where her kit is greatly welcomed, especially the party the MP charge effects, though then again, any team setup would like them too, to be honest. You can also try using her with Subaru if you really want to, given what their Bond CEs do. I'm sure Miss Ui wouldn't mind that, right? Next is everyone's favorite onigiri cat, Nekomata Okayu, who is an assassin with 13,000 HP, 11,000 attack, and 0.75% MP charge on attack. She has a 2Q 2A deck with 3-hit quicks, 2-hit arts, a 1-hit buster, and a 7-hit extra. She's true neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Archer, Caster, Berserker, Alter Ego, and Ruler. Her first skill is Mystic Eyes of Illumination C, which has a 30 to 50% chance to stun all enemies for 1 turn, and inflicts a unique spotted debuff onto them for 2 turns. The spotted debuff causes them to take 20% increased crit chance on a 6 to 4 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Pilfering Cat A, which lets Okayu steal 1 buff of her choice from all enemies, and if a target doesn't have any buffs for her to steal, she puts a 1-time buff block on them instead, and she reduces their attack and defense by 10 to 20% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. And her third skill is They Stole My Onigiri A+++, which increases her own debuff success rate by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and seals all enemies' NPs for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passes are Territory Creation Virtual A+, which increases her arts performance in Stargen by 11%, ASMR EX, which increases her healing power by 25%, Cool Cat EX, which grants herself Skill Seal immunity and increases the attack of Aqua, Shion, and Korone by 15%, and this attack buff activates even if Okayu is in the back line, and Best Friends EX, which gives Korone all the same buffs that Okayu steals from enemies if they're deployed together. Her NP is Sins of the Nekomata, which is a support and utility arts NP that applies a unique Onigiriya status to your team for 5 turns, which causes all debuffs cast on your team, both from enemies and from your own team, to also be applied to enemies as well. It also reduces their attack by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, the enemies that is, and their defense by 20 to 40% for 3 turns too. And her Bond CE is Mogu Mogu Yummy, which has several effects. Whenever Okayu casts a debuff, she also heals the party for 1500 HP each, and whenever she steals a buff, she now automatically applies them to all of her teammates as well. If Korone is deployed with her, then the buffs that she gets from Korone this way have their remaining durations doubled. And if Aqua, Shion, or Korone are deployed with her, Okayu also increases their debuff resistance by 50%. Okayu is a powerful utility and alternate support assassin with the unique ability to steal buffs from her enemies. Normally she'd just keep the buffs that she steals for herself, but for Korone and with her Bond CE, she can share them with others as well. While she technically falls under the same category of servant as Mel or Choco, who are also support and utility assassins, Okayu is actually closer to Azuki from earlier in terms of gameplay since they're both control type servants. It's just that Okayu is more of a buff controller as opposed to Azuki's debuff controller. Do note that in FGO, in certain fights like late game boss battles and event challenge quests, enemies frequently have buffs that can't be removed, and so Okayu's buff stealing gimmick won't work against those, since that'd be a little too broken if she could do that. Even still, this ability is extremely powerful, so strong in fact, that it's probably why this kind of ability doesn't exist in the actual game. Not yet, anyway. And the last of the gamers, since we already covered the fox, Inugami Korone. She's a berserker with 13,200 HP, 11,700 attack, and 0.40% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 5-hit quick, 6-hit arts, 3-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's chaotic neutral and sky attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Archer, Avenger, and Ruler. Her first skill is Really Big Chainsaw B+, which increases her own buster performance by 20%, increases party buster performance including her own again by another 10 to 20%, and increases party crit damage by 20 to 30%, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Really Strong Bonk C, which increases her own star absorption by 4,000 to 8,000% for 1 turn, and increases her own attack by 50 to 100%, also for 1 turn on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Really Scary Hellhound EX, which does a lot. It grants Korone the following buffs all for 2 turns. Invul, debuff immunity, 100% buff removal resistance, 50 to 100% increased insta-kill success rate, and 30 to 50% increased anti-humanoid damage. It also inflicts terror onto all enemies for 2 turns with a 40 to 60% activation chance to stun them each turn for 1 time. However, it also grants her a delayed buff that has a 500% chance to stun her for 1 turn after 2 turns, and all this on a 10 to 8 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gen by 12%, Manus Enhancement B+, which increases her buster performance by 9%, and Rip and Tear A+, which grants her 100% mental debuff immunity and increases her crit damage by 10% every time she crits with a maximum of 5 stacks. She also has Wisdom of the Dog God A++, which increases her arts performance by 12% again, and debuff resistance by 20%, Hard Puncher B, which increases the crit damage of her buster cards by 8%, Divinity C, which increases her own damage by a flat 150, and Best Friends EX, which reduces Okayu's base skill cooldowns by 1 if she's deployed with Korone. Her NP is Yubi, as you might have guessed, which is a 7-hit AoE buster NP that first increases her own star gem by 100% for 1 turn, then deals 300 to 500% damage to all enemies. If the enemies have an active terror debuff when Korone uses her NP on them, it will increase their terror stun chance to 200% for that turn. It also increases her crit damage by 50 to 100% and has a 50 to 100% chance to instant kill them. Her Bond CE is Wonderful World, which grants her a 1-time Guts that revives her with full HP and nullifies her defensive class advantage as a Berserker for the rest of the battle. If she's deployed with Okayu, the CE will also apply the same Guts effect onto Okayu and increases Korone's MP damage by 30%. Korone is a crit Berserker with a very low cooldown Star Weight skill, which gives her easy access to big damage whenever it's most convenient for her, her own double buster buff, and a third skill that basically makes her go Ultra Instinct for 2 turns, though with some pretty serious downsides that can end up killing her if you're not prepared to deal with them. Her only issue is star generation. She does have a way to produce her own stars with her NP, but it'll only last her 1 turn at a time unless she manages to get arts crits somehow and loop her NP back to back. And assuming that doesn't happen, given her second skill's very fast cooldown, she'll need a teammate who can generate stars for her if she wants to put that skill to consistent use. But other than that, have fun collecting fingers and chainsawing people with your favorite bread dog. And up next is 3rd gen. First is the Crazy Rabbit, Usada Pekora. Sorry, wrong game. She's our first Moon Cancer, and yes, there is actually a class called Moon Cancer in FGO. And she has 12,000 HP, 10,000 attack, and 0.61% MP charge on attack. She has a 2Q2A deck with 4-hit quicks, 3-hit arts, a 1-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. She's Chaotic Evil and Earth attribute despite being a Moon Cancer, yes I know, and her alternate classes are Caster and Assassin. Her first skill is War Criminal A++, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, further increases the attack of all chaotic allies, including herself, by 10%, further increases the attack of all evil allies, including herself, by 10%, and these effects both stack, and increases party crit damage by 30 to 50%, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Prankster B+, which applies a taunt onto one ally and reduces their defense by 30% for 1 turn as a demerit. But she also increases their buster, arts, and quick performances all by 20 to 30% for 1 turn, and she produces 20 to 30 stars immediately on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Of note, if Pekora uses the skill on Moona if they're deployed together, Moona does not receive the 30% defense debuff demerit. Her third skill is Lunarian Psychic Networking C-, which charges one ally's MP gauge by 20 to 30%, removes their debuffs, and increases their star absorption by 3,000 to 6,000% for 1 turn on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. If she uses the skill on Moona, it increases all of Moona's normal attack hit counts by 2 for 3 turns. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gen by 12%, Magic Resist A, which increases her own debuff resist by by 20%, Usada Construction A, which increases party quick performance and debuff success rate by 10%, and if Moona is deployed with Pekora, this passive also increases Moona's arts and buster performance by 10%, Lunarian Royalty A, which increases her own MP damage and star gen by 10%, and Independent Action B, which increases her own crit damage by 8%. Her NP is Pekoland's Story, which is a 6-hit AoE quick NP that first removes all enemy buffs, then deals 600 to 1000% damage to all enemies. It also reduces their buff success rates by 30 to 70% for 3 turns as overcharge. Her Bond CE is which reduces party debuff resistance by 25% as a demerit, but improves her skills. It removes her first skill's condition so that it's a double attack buff for anyone, and reduces its skill cooldown to 5 to 3 turns instead. It also extends the buff durations of her second skill to 3 turns instead of 1, but this does not include the taunt or the defense debuff. And it does the same for her third skill, Star Absorption buff too. If Miko is deployed with Pekora, it removes all the demerits from Miko's skills. If Moona is deployed with Pekora, it strengthens all of Moona's skill efficiencies by 10%. And if Kiara is deployed with Pekora, it grants Kiara an extra guts at the start of battle that stacks with all other guts and revives her with 1 HP. Pekora is a support utility moon cancer, as strange as that sounds. She synergizes best with other chaotic or evil allies, preferably both, and provides strong burst damage with her skills if she uses them together. Her only issue is that her second and third skills only last for 1 turn for the most part, so she can't give sustained support like most other support servants can. So make sure to make the most out of them for that 1 turn or use her Bond C once you get it. Next is Hololive's aspiring death metal vocalist, Uruha Rushia. She's an assassin with 13,000 HP, 11,000 attack, and 0.39 MP charge on attack. She's got triple arts deck with a 4-hit quick, 4-hit arts, a 4-hit buster, and a 4-hit extra. She's chaotic neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are caster and berserker. Her first skill is Necromancy EX, which applies a unique fan dead status to all allies except herself for 3 turns. The status instantly revives them if they die for 2,000 to 4,000 HP and produces 15 to 25 crit stars for your next turn per ally that revives. Revived allies also gain the Undead trait for the rest of the battle. This skill also increases the attack of all undead allies by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Resurrection Butterfly EX, which increases party crit damage by 20 to 30% for 5 turns. It also grants the party an on-revive activate buff for 1 time no limit that charges the MP gauges of revived allies when triggered by 30 to 50%, and any activation of Guts or a revival effect can trigger this effect, even if it's not a Guts effect cast by Rushia herself. And as if that weren't enough, once per battle, Rushia can revive a fallen ally and restore them fully, meaning that they come back with full HP and refresh skills, but 0% MP charge, and that ally now has the Undead trait for the rest of the battle. Of note, if there are already 3 servants on the field, when Rushia resurrects an ally, whoever entered the front line last will move back so that the revived ally can take back their place. Her third skill is Mystic Eyes of Death Perception Butterfly EX, which grants herself permanent skill seal immunity, but it can be removed. It also increases her arts performance by 20 to 30%, increases her arts crit damage by 30 to 50%, and grants her an on-attack activate buff that gives her normal attacks a 30 to 50% chance to insta-kill her targets all for 5 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gen by 12%, Magic Resist A++, which increases her debuff resist by 22%, Iron Lungs EX, which increases her own insta-kill success rate by 25%, Makayan Royalty A, which increases her own max HP by 1000 and star gem by 10%, ASMR B+, which increases her own healing power by 19%, Necromancer Princess A-, which increases her damage against undead enemies by 29%, and At the Boundary B, which grants herself insta-kill immunity, increases her own charm resistance by 50%, and gives her a 5% chance to insta-kill enemies when normal attacking. Her NP is Necromancer Princess Princess Rushia, which is an arts utility and install NP that reduces all enemies' MP charges by 1, increases their attack by 20% for 3 turns as a demerit, increases her own insta-kill success rate by 100% for 3 turns, and increases her arts performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. It also produces 10 to 30 stars every turn for 3 turns, and increases Rushia's crit damage by another 30 to 70%. And her Bond CE is Rapaloceran Eyes, which increases Rushia's star gen by 100%, party arts performance by 10%, and party arts crit damage by another 20%. Rushia is another potentially hilariously broken servant that I've made for this video. She's an arts crit assassin who cranks up her necromancy abilities to 11 with her skills that are all EX rank. For what it's worth, she's the only servant so far who has EX rank in all 3 of her active skills. Not that skill rank has much to do with how strong servant skills turn out to be, but the point is, Rushia is Omega strong, at least in my own headcanon. On top of her arts DPS potential, Rushia has the blatantly overpowered ability to just straight up resurrect one of your servants if they've died, which appropriately is something only she can do. In fact, her game plan is to try to get her allies to actually die at some point in a fight, so that she can revive them with her skills, give them the undead trait, and start giving them fat 50% attack buffs that'll dramatically increase the team's damage output. Her only issue is star generation, which, as you might be able to tell, is kind of a recurring issue for some of the DPS servants so far. As an assassin herself with only 1 quick card, she'll struggle generating stars for herself, and her MP's overcharge might not be enough on its own to maintain crits for her, so make sure to bring another source of crit stars for her to tap into. Next is the Fire Elf, Shiranui Flare. She's an archer with 13,600 HP, 11,800 attack, and 0.55% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 3-hit quick, 4-hit arts, 5-hit busters, and a 6-hit extra. She's true neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are saber and caster. Her first skill is Elven Flames A-, which grants herself an on-attack activate buff for 3 turns that causes her normal attacks to inflict burn onto enemies that deal 500 to 1000 damage a turn, and this burn demerit can stack. It also increases party attack by 10 to 20% for 3 turns. Additionally, if Noel is deployed with Flare, this skill grants Noel the same on-attack activate buff and charges her MP gauge by 20-30%, all this on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Whispers in the Leaves EX, which grants her evasion for 2 hits, no limit, and if this skill is used again before both evasion stacks are used, it just refreshes her stacks. It also increases her arts performance by 20-30% for 3 turns, and Noel's buster performance by 20-30% as well for 3 turns, if Noel is deployed with Flare on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Megalovaniac A++, which increases her own special damage against undead, demonic, or divine enemies by 50 to 100% for 3 turns. If Noel is deployed with Flare, this buff is also granted to the rest of the party, except for Flare of course, because she already has it, and increases Noel's star absorption by 3000 to 6000% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her own arts performance and star gen by 6%, Magic Resist B, which increases her own debuff resist by 17.5%, Independent Action Noel A, which increases her own crit damage by 10%, and it also increases Noel's crit damage by 10% if they're deployed together, Mixed Blood Elf EX, which charges her own MP gauge by 3% every turn and increases her debuff resist by 10%, and Kintsuba A, which reduces her own damage taken by 500. She also has Bakatare A, which increases Flare's, Watame's, and Fubuki's buster, arts, and quick performance by 20% if any combination of those 3 are deployed together, and Holy Union EX, which gives Flare's arts and buster cards the special property of being interchangeable with Noel's arts and buster cards, determined by the first card in their chain. Her NP is Guilty Hellfire, which is a 3-hit AoE arts NP that first increases her own NP damage by 20% for 1 turn, and removes all enemies' defensive buffs if they have an active burn DOT on them, then deals 450 to 750% damage to all enemies. It also deals 150 to 200% extra damage to enemies inflicted with burn, and inflicts them with another Spread of Fire debuff that increases their burn damage taken by 100 to 200% for 5 turns. Her Bond CE is One Last Fantasy, which increases party arts and buster performance by 10% and further increases arts and buster performance of all 3rd gen members by 20% for a total of 30%. If Noel is deployed with Flare, it also grants Noel Guts for 1 time that revives her with 1 HP and charges her MP gauge to 100% immediately when it's activated, and that stacks with all other Guts. You can probably tell by now that Noel has a huge part in Flare's kit, so to make the explanation part cohesive, let's go over Noel's kit first. Lammy's pet cow is a saber with 15,500 HP, 10,500 attack, and 1.2% MP charge on attack. She has a full buster deck with 3-hit quick, 2-hit arts, 1-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's lawful good and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Archer, Lancer, Rider, and Berserker. Her first skill is Knights of Silver Steel B++, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, further increases attack of all Knight class allies by 10 to 20%, including herself, increases party defense by 10 to 20%, and further increases Flare's defense by 20 to 30% this time if Flare is deployed with Noel, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Rally of Silver Steel C+, which draws the attention of all enemies to herself for 3 turns and reduces her damage taken by 500 to 1000 for 3 turns, but reduces her own debuff resist by 500% for 3 turns as a buff, and inflicts a modified buff block onto herself that only denies debuff immunity and debuff removal effects for 3 turns as a buff too on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Vengeance of Silver Steel EX, which grants herself a Guts that can't be removed for 1 time 5 turns, and grants herself a unique Vengeance of Silver Steel status for 5 turns as well. This status increases her own attack by 5 to 15% for 3 turns every time Noel receives damage. However, DOTs do not trigger this effect because Noel has to take a direct enemy attack. If Flare is deployed with Noel, every time that Flare receives direct damage while Dancho has her Vengeance status active, this increases Noel's buster performance by 5 to 15% for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance in Star Gem by 12%, Manus Enhancement E, which increases her buster performance by 2%, ASMR EX, which increases her own healing power by 25%, Magic Resist D, which increases her debuff resist by 12.5%, Independent Action Flare EX, which causes Noel to gain 5 crit stars and a 3-turn 5% crit damage buff for every buff that she receives from Flare, and Holy Union EX, which gives Noel's arts and buster cards the unique property of being interchangeable with Flare's own arts and buster cards, determined by the first card in their chain. Her NP is Holy Orders of Silver Steel, which is an installed buster NP that heals her for 5,000 HP, increases her buster performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, grants her Ignore Invulnerability for 3 turns, and produces 10 crit stars every turn for 3 turns. It also increases her own crit damage by 100 to 200%, and her special damage against evil enemies by 50 to 100% for 3 turns. And her Bond CE is Flames of the Half-Elf, which increases her own damage against enemies with an active burn DOT by 50%. There have been servant synergies throughout this video, but none to the extent that Noel and Flare have. So let's briefly talk about Flare first, then Dancho, and then the two of them together. Flare is a DPS archer whose game plan revolves around using her burn infusion to set enemies on fire first, and then use her MP on them for big damage. She also specializes against undead, demonic, or divine enemies, and you have Sans to thank for that one. Noel is a tank saber with thick HP and a 3-turn taunt to keep her team safe at her expense. However, she doesn't take damage for free and instead gets stronger the more attacks that she takes. She does have a support skill that buffs other Knight class allies like herself, but once she uses her NP, she becomes a full-blown crit saber who hits like a truck, and even harder against evil enemies. Together, however, Flare becomes a dedicated support for Noel because almost her entire kit buffs Noel in some way, and Noel turns into a monster of a saber who can eat dozens of beef bowls and yeet dragons in her spare time. One special trait that they share is their Holy Union passive. It basically allows them to use arts or buster chains with both arts and buster cards, if this makes sense. Because normally you must use all arts cards for arts chains and all buster cards for buster chains. But Flare and Noel can use any of their arts or buster cards for either chain and get around this rule, which, while it's not unique to them since there is someone else who also has the same mechanic later on in the video, is still an extremely rare gimmick and one that doesn't exist in the actual game, probably because it would be too broken. Essentially, Noel and Flare are meant to be used as a pair because they're most effective that way, so make sure to bring a third wheel who can cover whatever holes you see in their gameplay, and have fun watching Dancho whack bitches out of existence. And last of the third gens, everyone's favorite boomer pirate, Houshou Marine, who's a rider with 13,000 HP, 11,300 attack, and 0.42% MP charge on attack. She's got a balanced deck with a 6-hit quick, 4-hit arts, 2-hit busters, and a 4-hit extra. She's chaotic good and star attribute, and her alternate class is Berserker. Her first skill is a Pirate's Charm E+, which has a 20 to 30% chance to charm all enemies for 1 turn, charges her own MP gauge by 20 to 30%, and increases party MP generation rates by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Gensokyo's Protection EX, which grants her true evasion for 1 turn that can't be pierced or removed, though ignore invulnerability effects can still go through it. It also increases party attack by 20 to 30% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Marine's Marauder's A+++, which grants the party ignore defense for 3 turns, increases party's buster performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and charges party MP gauges by 10 to 20% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance in Star Gem by 12%, ASMR D, which increases her own healing power by 8%, Magic Resist E, which increases her debuff resist by 10%, Amnesiac C, which increases her own resistance against debuffs except mental debuffs by 20%, but reduces her resistance against mental debuffs by 20%, and Speedrunner B, which increases her MP gen by 10%. She also has Harvard Graduate Self-Proclaimed A, which increases her MP gen by 15%, Riding D, which increases her quick performance by 4%, and Battle Cruiser Fire Support A++, which increases her buster performance by 10%, buster crit damage by 20%, and produces 5 stars for every buster card that Marine uses. Her NP is Super Marine Cannon, which is a 5-hit AoE buster NP, which first increases each of her buff type's efficiencies by 20% for 1 turn, then deals 300 to 500% damage to all enemies, and inflicts burn onto them that deals 5,000 damage every turn for 5 turns that can't be removed. It also produces 20 to 40 stars and increases party MP damage afterwards by 20 to 40% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is Magistrate of the Ocean of Stars, which produces 15 stars every turn. If Pekora is deployed with Marine, it grants Pekora Inbull for 3 attacks. If Shion is deployed with Marine, it increases Shion's star gen by 50%. If Ayame is deployed with Marine, it increases Ayame's MP damage by 30%, and if Okayu is deployed with Marine, it increases Okayu's MP gen by 50%. Sencho is a DPS rider, as you can tell. More specifically, she's a great farming rider with a 50% battery because clearly we didn't have enough riders in FGO with 50% batteries, and great farming support skills like a 30% attack buff and 30% buster buff. I'm not sure how well Sencho will handle farming given the stamina that she's got, but we'll just ignore that for now. She can also be used as a setup support rider because she has a very rare team buff in her third skill, the Ignore Defense effect. This combined with her damage buffs can give her a place in certain team setups for challenge quests or boss fights that involve enemies with very heavy defense buffs, especially those that can't be removed. Of note, the offensive buff effect on her NP increases each category of damage buff that Marine has by 20%. This means that ideally Marine wants to have all 3 categories of damage, attack, color, and special or MP damage when she uses her NP, because if she's missing a category, she won't get another 20% for it. And that's it for 3rd gen. 4th gen up next. First, we've got our favorite PowerPoint angel, or Amane Kanata, who's a ruler with 13,500 HP, 11,600 attack, and 0.83% MP charge on attack. She's got a full buster deck with a 3-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 3-hit busters, and a 3-hit extra. She's lawful good and sky attribute, and her alternate classes are caster and berserker. Her first skill is Immortal Beloved EX, which grants one ally invulnerability for 1 turn and mental debuff immunity for 3 turns. It also increases their star gen by 50 to 100%, also for 3 turns. If this is used on Coco, it also increases her buster performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Monstrous Strength Gorilla A+++, which increases her own attack and buster performance by 20 to 40% each for 3 turns, and her crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Perfect Pitch Tenshi A+++, which increases the party's card performance by 20 to 40% for 3 turns. Kanata can actually individually select which card to buff for each teammate, including herself, when she uses this skill. It also grants the party Invulnerability Pierce for 3 turns and reduces party skill cooldowns by 1 on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual A, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 10%, Divinity A, which increases her damage by 200, Magic Resistance EX, which increases her debuff resistance by 25%, Angel Fall A+, which increases her attack by 3% for every attack dealt to her for a maximum of 10 stacks. But these stacks reset whenever Kanata recovers HP. She also has Soran Bushi EX, which increases party buster crit damage by 20%, and PowerPoint Tenshi B, which converts half of any arts buff that Kanata receives into an additional buster buff for the same duration. Her NP is Sound of Heaven, which is a one-hit AoE arts NP that deals 450 to 750% damage to all enemies, heals the party for 2000-4000 HP, and has a 500% chance to debuff all enemies NP damage by 50% for 3 turns. It also increases party arts performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns that activates first before the NP deals damage. And her Bond CE is Almost Heaven, which increases the party's arts and buster performance by 20% and their NP damage resistance by 30%. If Coco is deployed with Kanata, it grants both of them permanent debuff immunity. Kanata is a DPS ruler whose Berserker deck should tell you literally everything you need to know about how she's played here. Make some crit stars, turn your brain off, and hit those big juicy red buttons, baby. But she's not just a brain-dead Unga Bunga gorilla ruler though, since she does have some useful utility in her kit. Her third skill is easily top 10 best skills throughout this whole video since it has so much useful utility all packed together, and her NP has the potential to protect your team from enemy NPs, especially if you have either Kanata's Bond CE on or other servants who have their own attack debuffs. Next is our Yakuza Dragon boss, Kiryu Coco. She's a rider with 13,200 HP, 11,500 attack, and 0.86% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 3-hit quick, 2-hit arts, 1-hit buster, and a 6-hit extra. She's chaotic good and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Berserker and Alter Ego. Her first skill is Dragon's Charisma A, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, further increases the attack of all dragon allies by 10 to 20%, and increases party defense against all dragon enemies by 30 to 50%, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. If Kanata is deployed with her, this skill also increases Kanata's buster card star absorption by 600% for 3 turns. Her second skill is Asakoko D+, which is one hell of a skill. It goes something like this. Coco can use this skill 5 separate times, or in other words, this is basically 5 skills all in one, and each effect has its own independent cooldown duration because the idea is that Coco has 5 different types of Asakoko on her at all times, and each of them do something different. Inhalant type Asakoko increases one ally's arts performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn. Tablet type Asakoko increases one ally's buster performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn. Syringe type Asakoko increases one ally's quick performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn. IV type Asakoko heals one ally for 3,000 to 5,000 HP every turn for 3 turns, and Dragon Tail type Asakoko increases one ally's MP damage by 30 to 50% for 1 turn. However, as you might imagine, there are obviously dangerous consequences to overdosing on Asakoko. If an ally uses 2 of these effects on the same turn, their debuff resistance gets reduced by 50% for 3 turns. If they use 3 on the same turn, their defense gets reduced by 30% for 3 turns. If they use 4, they get inflicted with poison that deals 2,000 damage to them every turn for 5 turns. And if they use all 5, well shit, their MP generation rate gets reduced to 0% for 1 turn. And not only that, after that turn, their attack MP damage, and quick arts and buster performances all get reduced by 50% for 3 turns. Oh, and all these buffs are also cumulative, meaning that if an ally gets all 5 stacks of Asakoko on the same turn, they suffer all of the aforementioned debuffs too. Each of these Asakoko products have a cooldown of 7 to 5 turns, so please use them responsibly. Or not, I don't give a fuck, I'm not your Kaicho. Her third skill is Pride of the Kiryu Clan EX, which grants herself guts for 2 times that revives her with 3000 to 6000 HP, has no limit, and cannot be removed. It also charges her MP gauge by 30 to 50%, increases her own buster performance by 30 to 50% for 3 times, 3 turns, and increases her MP damage also by 30 to 50% for 1 time, 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 12%, Magic Resist D, which increases her debuff resist by 12.5%, Dragonkind EX, which increases her own buster performance by 12% and reduces her damage taken by 200, Protection of Shenron EX, which further reduces her damage taken by 1500, and Heart of a Yakuza A+, which causes every critical hit that Coco deals to also inflict burn onto its target that deals 2000 damage every turn for 3 turns, and these burn demerits can stack. Her NP is Review This Motherfucker, which is a 7-hit buster AoE NP that first ignores invulnerability for 1 turn, then deals 300 to 500% damage that also ignores defense to all enemies. If Coco specifically has Kanata's Ignore Invulnerability buff from her S3 already active, then her own Ignore Invulnerability effect changes to remove all enemy buffs instead. It also increases party defense by 20 to 60% and reduces all enemies' defense by 20 to 60% both for 5 turns. Enerbon CE is a contemporary dragon which increases all idle type servants' attack by 10% and crit damage by 30%. If Aqua is deployed with her, then it increases both of their crit damage when attacking with buster cards by 30%. If Shion is deployed with her, then it grants Shion 5 stacks of evasion, and if Kanata is deployed with her, it increases both of their max HPs by 3000. Like her housemate, Coco is also a hybrid DPS, just a rider this time. Her main gimmick is her second skill, which, like I said before, is honestly like 5 skills in one. Just don't force her teammates to OD on that shit, drugs are bad, okay? Note that Coco's NP has both Invul Pierce and Defense Pierce natively, so she has no problem dealing with enemies who like spamming their defensive skills for whatever reason. So basically, Coco drugs her teammates to make them fight better and oftentimes at their own expense, and she memes on people and makes them die from shitty Japanese and other cringy memes she finds on the Hololive subreddit to share with everyone every Saturday. Shoutouts to the Hololive subreddit, by the way, you guys are awesome. Next is the respawning sheep, Tsunomaki Watame. She's a caster with 13,800 HP, 10,800 attack, and 0.54% MP charge on attack. She's got a standard caster deck with a 3-hit quick, 3-hit arts, a 3-hit buster, and a 5-hit extra. She's neutral good and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Rider and Berserker. Her first skill is Tsunomaki Jankenpon A, which applies a rock paper scissors status onto all enemies with no limit. This allows Watame to play rock paper scissors with them once per turn for 3 turns. At the start of your turn, Watame must choose a move to use, while enemies also select a random one to play against her. Of note, each enemy on the field is playing rock paper scissors too, which means that Watame is using a maximum of 3 effects per turn against a full enemy lineup. If Watame wins, then she can choose one effect from the following 3. Drain the loser's MP gauge by 1 and charge party MP gauges by 10 to 20%. 500% chance to reduce their debuff resistance and attack both by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, or increase the party's buster, arts, and quick performance by 10 to 20% for 3 turns. If Watame ties, then one effect from the 3 listed will be randomly selected and cast, and if Watame loses, her own attack gets reduced by 20 to 0%, but her teammates will have their attack increased instead by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Of note, this skill will only enter cooldown once the rock paper scissors game has played for 3 turns, and Watame cannot stack this skill. She can only have 1 cycle of Jankenpon active at any time. So if her first skill somehow gets immediately refreshed while there's an active rock paper scissors game already going on, Watame cannot use the skill again until the first game has gone for its full 3 turns. There is an exception, however, and that's if Watame is only facing 1 enemy. If this is the case, then Watame can begin stacking her Jankenpon skill so that she's playing it twice twice against the same enemy every turn. However, even then she can only have 2 rock paper scissors games going on at the same time, so just 2 stacks maximum. Her second skill is Inhalant type Asakoko C, which increases her own arts performance by 10 to 20% for 5 turns. It also grants her permanent Asakoko debuff immunity, which allows her to ignore the debuffs that are normally associated with Coco's second skill when she uses it repeatedly on the same turn and on the same servant. But it also grants her a delayed debuff called Asakoko Withdrawal that counts as a buff. It removes the Asakoko debuff immunity if Watame doesn't receive an Asakoko type skill within 4 turns of initially casting this skill, and inflicts a 500% chance to stun Watame for 1 turn, all on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Watame Did Nothing Wrong C, which draws the attention of all enemies to her other 2 teammates on the field and not her, and it reduces all enemies' crit chance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on a 6 to 4 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual A, which increases her own arts performance and star gem by 10%, Traveling Bard A, which increases party debuff resistance by 20%, 8-second Respawn A++, which grants her a flat 30% chance to revive with 1 HP upon taking a fatal hit if Watame has no other guts effect active, and this skill can be affected by friendly buff success buffs, and Bakatare A, which increases Fubuki's, Flares, and her own Buster, Arts, and Quick Performance by 20% if any combination of them are deployed together. Her NP is Giga Horn Drill, which is a 2-hit single target NP that deals 900 to 1500% damage to 1 enemy. If her first skill is on cooldown at the time that she uses this NP, it gets refreshed immediately. This NP also deals 150 to 200% extra damage against Divine and Beast or Animal type enemies. And her Bond CE is Harp of the Sheep, which grants the party 3 stacks of debuff immunity at the start of battle. It also increases party arts performance and NP generation rate by 15% each. Watame is also another wacky hybrid support servant with the unique mechanic to literally play rock paper scissors with her enemies. To explain a little further, each individual enemy plays rock paper scissors with Watame, so against a full enemy lineup of 3 targets, Watame can cast 3 effects total. So in this sense, you actually want to be fighting against 3 enemies at all times, but to prevent Watame from having her utility slashed by too much if you want to take her into boss fights or other battles with only 1 enemy in them, she can at least stack her first skill twice to make up for the fact that there aren't any extra side mobs that she can play rock paper scissors with. Unfortunately, while it is a potentially really powerful support skill, rock paper scissors is ultimately RNG, since, well, that's what RPS is for the most part. To make up for this, Watame's NP has the ability to instantly refresh the skill so that theoretically she can have infinite uptime on it. Well, that on its own might be broken too, but whatever, just listen to the cute sheep telling you
悪くないよね。
Next is my Oshi, the Maji Daitenshi herself, Tokoyami Towa. For full transparency, I made not just 1, but 3 different profiles for her, so I hope you don't mind my shameless and unprofessional bias for my favorite VTuber. Her first profile is as an archer with 13,000 HP and 12,000 attack, and with 0.43% MP charge on attack. She has a 2Q2A deck with 6-hit quicks, 6-hit arts, 6-hit buster, and a 6-hit extra. She's both lawful evil and good at the same time, an earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Lancer, Rider, Caster, Assassin, and Avenger. Her first skill is Marksmanship Towa A+, which increases the crit damage of all idol type servants deployed with her by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, increases the attack of all allies with any rank of Apex Predator passive by 50% for 1 turn, and grants herself evasion for 2 attacks, no limit, on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Pure Eyes Devil EX, which increases party quick performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, charges party MP gauges by 10 to 20% directly, and then further grants the party MP regen that charges party MP gauges by another 5 to 10% every turn for 5 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Protection of BB EX, which grants herself a unique demonic invulnerability buff for 2 attacks. This form of Invul heals her for 2000 and 3000 HP for each attack that it absorbs, and the heal activates first before the damage. This is important because Demonic Invul is still susceptible to enemy ignore Invul effects, so having the heal activate before the damage can potentially save Towa's life. This skill also increases her own crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 attacks, no limit, and this buff only activates when Towa lands a successful crit and on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her arts performance in Star Gem by 6%, and Welcome to the Family A+++, which adds 5 more crit stars for every skill or buff used by the party when Towa is deployed that produces stars. So for example, if Kanata uses her NP while Towa is on the field with her, at OC1, Kanata will be producing 25 crit stars instead of the usual 20. She also has TMD Daipan A++, which grants Towa's Buster card a 50% chance of stunning its target for 1 turn, Worldwide Kenzoku EX, which increases the attack of all non-Japanese allies by 10% and increases the defense of all Japanese allies by 10%, Independent Action B, which increases her crit damage by 8%, Magic Resist A, which increases her debuff resist by 20%, and Apex Predator A++, which increases her crit damage by 12% and adds an extra 5% for every other servant deployed with Towa who also has the same base passive. Her NP is Brilliant, which is a support quick NP that first removes party debuffs, then increases party quick performance by 30 to 50% and party crit damage by 30 to 50%, both for 5 turns. It also increases party NP generation rates by 20 to 40% and grants the party HP regen that heals the party for 2000 to 4000 HP every turn, both for 5 turns as well. And her Bond CE is Palette, a Devil's Communion Earth, which grants the party debuff immunity for 5 turns and increases the party's arts performance by 30%. Towa is an experimental archer who has strong support capabilities that also enables herself to become a DPS archer once she gets her buffs going. Usually in FGO, DPS or support roles are pretty rigid, but there are a few servants who can be this flex type of servant who can switch between support or DPS, but for the most part, there isn't one that can be both at the same time. This is where Archer Towa comes in. Her second skill in MP support the team, while her other 2 skills are self buffs that give her much higher damage potential than her usual support servants. The only thing that she's missing here is star generation, but in Towa's case, that's not as much of an issue because she's a quick support, so her team as a whole should be able to produce a lot of stars naturally just by using their quick cards a lot. On the topic of being a quick support, I designed Archer Towa to specifically be the quote next big quick support, or at least that was my intention, because those of you JP mains out there are just gonna point at me with your overworked Castorias and your Scotties who've been collecting dust in your accounts for the past year. Basically, the issue with quick teams in FGO right now is that they generally don't have a lot of long-term utility, and it doesn't help that the current dedicated quick support caster, Scotty, doesn't offer much in that field either, and even more so now that her job got yoinked by Castoria last year. Not that she really minds though, given how overworked she'd been for the 2 years prior to that. So hopefully Towa, with her long-lasting buffs, can help address this problem. Lancer Towa this time. She has 13,600 HP, 12,300 attack, and 0.50% MP charge on attack. She has a Lancer deck with 6-hit quicks, a 6-hit arts, 6-hit busters, and a 6-hit extra. She's Lawful Evil and Sky attribute this time, and her alternate classes are Archer, Caster, Assassin, and Avenger. Her first skill is Sadistic Charisma Debitu B, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, further increases the attack of all evil allies by 10% including herself, and further increases the attack of all female allies by 10% again, including herself, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Protection of BB EX, which is the exact same skill that her Archer form has. Her third skill is Towa Maji Debitu EX, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, further increases the attack of all demonic allies by 10 to 20%, including herself, and increases her own special damage against neutral and good enemies by 30 to 50%, all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Lancer Towa keeps her Territory Creation, Welcome to the Family, and Worldwide Kenzoku passives from her Archer form, but she gets the following new passives: Magic Resist EX, which increases her debuff resistance by 25%, Bane of Light and Good B, which increases her defense by 15%, and debuff resist by 25% specifically against good enemies, and TMD Daipan A, which gives Towa's buster cards a 25% chance to stun their targets for one turn, down from 50% in her archer profile since she has 2 buster cards here as a lancer. Her NP is Bocca della Verità, which is a 6-hit single target buster NP that first grants her Ignore Invul for one turn, then deals 600 to 1000% damage that ignores defense to one enemy. It also has a 500% chance to reduce its target's buster resist by 30 to 50% for 3 turns that also activates first before the MP deals damage. Enerbon CE is Palette, a Devil's Communion Hell, which produces 10 stars every turn and increases her buster performance by 20%. Lancer Towa is a much more straightforward DPS servant, but she still brings quite a hefty amount of support skills to her team. Specifically, she has a double buff for evil female allies and for demonic allies, and since there are servants who are evil, female, and demonic, Lancer Towa is probably one of the best damage supports you could give them. So while she isn't going to be a dedicated support like her archer form anytime soon, she still has the flexibility of being either a main DPS or being a setup support for another DPS teammate who qualifies for all the buffs that Towa can give. And for her final profile, Caster Towa, she's got 14,500 HP and 10,500 attack with 0.50% MP charge on attack. She has a full caster deck with only half the hit counts as before. She is neutral good this time and star attribute, and her alternate classes are Archer, Lancer, Assassin, and Avenger. Her first skill is Towa Maji Dai Tenshi EX, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, further increases the attack of all good allies except herself by another 10 to 20%, and further increases the attack of all Sky or Star attribute allies except herself by yet another 10 to 20%, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Pure Eyes Angel EX, which increases the party's art's performance by 20 to 30%, their art's crit damage by 30 to 50%, and grants them Ignore Invulnerability all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Protection of BB Inverted EX, which grants the party this time a unique Angelic Invulnerability buff, which is a stronger version of her earlier Demonic Invulnerability for 2 attacks. Angelic Invul is immune to enemy Ignore Invul effects, increases the NP damage of the servant it's protecting by 10 to 20% per attack when attacked, and heals them for 3,000 to 5,000 HP when all Angelic Invul stacks are removed from them, either manually or with an enemy buff removal effect. It also increases their crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 attacks that only activates on a successful crit, all on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Again, she keeps her territory creation, welcome to the family, and worldwide Kenzoku passives from earlier. The new passives she gets as a caster are Magic Resistance EX in quotes, which increases her debuff resistance by 30%, and Bane of Dark and Evil B, which increases her own defense by 15% and debuff resistance by 25% specifically against evil enemies. Her last passive is Devil Unholy Knight A+, which produces 5 Angel Stars every turn. Angel Stars have the unique property of being able to be transferred from whatever card they were originally allotted to any other card in your current hand. Of note, while Towa's Welcome to the Family passive does activate its effect with this passive, it only produces regular crit stars, not another set of 5 Angel Stars. Her NP is, you guessed it, Error. It's a support arts NP that first reduces her own current HP by 50% as a demerit, but it removes party debuffs, increases the party's max HP, except her own though, by 2,000 and 3,000 for 3 turns, produces 20 to 40 stars, and renders Towa untargetable for 1 turn, which means that enemies cannot hit Towa at all, not even with AoE attacks, as long as Towa has at least 1 teammate on the field with her. However, if she's solo, then her untargetable status won't do anything. It also reduces the party's skill cooldowns by 1 to 5 turns depending on overcharge. Enerbon CE is Palette, an Angel's Communion Heaven, which grants all good allies, including herself, HP regeneration that heals them for 1500 HP every turn. It also adds a unique Refraction ability to Caster Towa's NP, which lets her choose 1 skill that her other classes have that her caster form doesn't, and activates it along with the rest of her NP's effects. The skill that she chooses this way must be a wholly different skill. For example, she can't pick Protection of BB again because she already has a variant of it as a caster. Rather than ramble about Caster Toa's gameplay stuff, since it should be rather obvious, at least to you FGO veterans, how broken her kit is, I'd like to briefly go over my headcanon behind Toa's 3 profiles. Archer Toa is the usual Toa we know, our cute Debiru who's obsessed with Apex and denies being an angel constantly even though we all know she actually is one. Her Lancer form is what she ideally wants to become, a fully fledged devil who's matured her demonic side once she's done studying how to actually become one. But her caster form is when she does the exact opposite and gives into her chat, constantly calling her an angel, thereby actually becoming one. Canonically, she's not supposed to be able to do that, and Toa herself wouldn't think that it's possible in the first place either. But the months and months of her chat memeing her as an angel, and all the time that she spent hanging out with Kanata, have accumulated enough faith in her to incorporate that as part of her identity. Jokes are the deepest lore after all. And last of the 4th gen, we've got our 0-year-old candy princess, Himemori Luna. She's a saber with 17,000 HP, 9,700 attack, and 0.60% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 3-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 4-hit busters, and a 7-hit extra. She's lawful evil and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Archer, Lancer, Rider, Caster, Berserker, and Moon Cancer. Her first skill is Cute is Justice A+, which increases her max HP by 2,000 to 3,000, increases her own defense by 20 to 30%, and reduces her damage taken by 300 to 500, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is A++, which grants her a unique click buff for 3 turns. While this buff is active, Luna gains an attack buff stack for each enemy attack that she takes that she can only use once the click buff itself expires. And once it does, Luna must then distribute all the attack buffs that she's gained up to this point to her party, including herself though, but she can distribute them any way she wants. Each attack buff increases its target's attack by 10 to 20%, and they all last for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Of note, if Luna ends up not getting attacked while her click buff is active, or if her team moves to a new wave, then the click buff will automatically expire, but Luna increases her party's attack directly by a flat 20% for 3 turns instead. Her third skill is Wallaby EX, which removes party debuffs, grants the party invulnerability for 1 turn, and heals the party for 1,000 to 2,000 HP every turn for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passes are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 6%, Magic Resist A, which increases her debuff resist by 20%, EX, which increases her debuff success rate by 100%, Princess's Luck EX, which gives Luna a 20% chance to double the efficiency of any of her buffs, and Authority of the Candy Princess EX, which increases the attack of all Knight class allies by 15% and reduces her own damage taken from Knight class enemies by 2,500. She also has Souls of the Lunites A++. When Luna is the last servant left on the field, 2 Lunites will spawn and join her. Their stats will scale proportionally with Luna's, their card decks will match hers, but they only have 1 skill, which is a taunt that draws the attention of all enemies to them, whoever used it, for 1 turn. And when they're defeated, before removing themselves from the field, they will each grant Luna 1-hit invulnerability that can stack with all other invulnerability effects, and a permanent 25% attack buff that can't be removed. This passive can only activate once per battle. Her NP is Moonlight Dreamblade, which is a 1-hit single target buster NP that first reduces her own max HP by 5,000 permanently. This debuff is considered a buff, but only occurs once per battle. It then reduces all enemies' buster, arts, and quick resistances by 30% for 3 turns before dealing 600 to 1,000% damage onto one enemy that ignores defense. It also deals a flat 30,000 damage to all other enemies and has a 500% chance to permanently increase Luna's buster, arts, and quick performances by 30 to 70% depending on overcharge level. But these buffs can be removed, and they can also be restored with subsequent uses of this NP. If Luna has this permanent set of color buffs already active when she uses her NP again, and they haven't been removed by enemies, it gives her a weaker and limited set of triple color buffs that increases her buster, arts, and quick performance by another 20 to 40% just for 3 turns this time. And her Bond CE is Moonlight Sonata, which grants her 100% buff removal resistance and increases her NP damage by 30%. It also gives her the ability to select any type of card deck before going into battle, but Luna must stick with this deck for that entire fight, and her MP type is hard stuck on Buster type. And finally, if Luna is deployed with either Matsuri or Marine, it reduces Matsuri's and Marine's debuff resistances by 50%, but increases the efficiencies of all damage buffs that those two get by 25%, which stacks multiplicatively, not additively. Luna is a hybrid DPS saber with emphasis on DPS. The idea behind her gameplay is that she's initially an extremely tanky saber with ludicrous amounts of HP and solid team support, but once she uses her MP the first time, she trades a considerable portion of her health for permanent buffs to take on a more aggressive DPS role. Unique to Luna, while she technically has a single target MP, it also deals splash damage to other enemies besides her target, so it's actually an AoE MP by all measures. While this may have some implications for boss battles or challenge quests that make you deal with multiple side mobs, more importantly, this gives Luna the potential to be a very useful farming saber since her splash damage can be strong enough in certain quests to clear waves by herself, even though she's only supposed to hit one bad guy at a time. 4th gen done, now onto 5th gen. First is our second drunk elf, Yukihana Lamy. She's a caster with 14,000 HP, 11,000 attack, and 1.7% MP charge on attack. She has a standard caster deck with a 2-hit quick, 1-hit arts, a 1-hit buster, and a 3-hit extra. She's lawful good and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are archer, assassin, and berserker. Her first skill is Frigid Charisma Elf A, which increases party attack by 10 to 20%, reduces all enemies' attack by 10 to 20%, and inflicts enemies with a unique Frigid debuff all for 3 turns. Enemies with the Frigid debuff reduce their own defense by another 10% every time they attack Lamy. However, Lamy also reduces her own defense when she casts this skill by 20% for 3 turns as a demerit on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Trail of the Narcissus B+, which creates a special Narcissus flower that behaves as a 4th entity in your front line. It then taunts all enemies for 2 turns, and its base HP scales from 30 to 50% of Lamy's own max HP. It also reduces the defense of any enemy that attacks it by 10% for 3 turns, and this debuff can stack. And when it's destroyed, or it expires, or if your team moves to a new wave, it removes party debuffs and increases their anti-evil and anti-demonic damage by 30 to 50% each for 3 turns, all on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Snowfall Theater Snow Globe of 5 Memories A, which increases her arts performance by 10 to 20%, then increases the party's arts performance by another 20 to 30%, both for 3 turns, and charges the party MP gauges by 20 to 30% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 6%, Blue Clapper Lamy A, which increases the arts performance of all idol type servants deployed with Lamy by 5%, and Sake A+++, which increases her attack by 20% when she has at least 1 active debuff on her. She also has Milk A++, which grants Lamy a 50% chance to remove the last applied debuff to her team whenever she uses her arts cards while deployed with Noel, Daifuku A, which increases her damage by 100 and heals her for 500 HP every turn, ASMR A++, which increases her own healing power by 23%, and Mixed Blood Elf EX, which charges her own MP gauge by 3% every turn and increases her debuff resist by 10%. Her NP is Smile of the Lamy, which is a 1-hit AoE arts NP that first has a 150% chance to freeze all enemies for 1 turn if they have an active Frigid debuff. Freeze is a custom effect that we saw earlier in Mio's profile that stuns them and denies them MP charge for that turn. If her enemies aren't affected by Frigid currently, then Lamy has a flat 70% chance to charm them instead, which increases to 120% specifically against male enemies. It then deals 450 to 750% damage to them and heals the party for 2,000 to 4,000 HP every turn for 3 turns, and increases party attack by 20 to 40% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is Departure from the Land of Silver, which grants her guts for 1 time, revives her with 1 HP, and increases her MP damage by 30%. If she's deployed with any other 5th gen member or any Elizabeth Bathory servant, this CE grants them all the same guts effect and MP damage buff from before. and if she's specifically deployed with Botan, it removes the defense debuff demerit from her first skill, removes her Sake passive, and just increases Lammy's attack permanently by 30% straight up instead. Lamy is a caster who can do it all: damage, support, and utility. Her damage comes from her high base attack for a caster, and her attack buffs, which provide much of her team support at the same time. Her utility is perhaps her best selling point, because not only does she have a freeze mechanic just like Mio that's complemented by a backup charm, but she also has the unique ability to create a taunt that acts as its own entity. In FGO, taunt skills must be used on one of your servants in the front line, which means that someone still needs to take the damage. Lammy's taunt means that none of your servants need to, because the damage is going to the taunt itself rather than your servants, as long as enemies don't use AoE attacks, of course. And Lammy's debuff cleanses are the icing on the cake, and even more so if she's deployed with Noel. And speaking of Noel, I'm definitely not trying to push a Noel Flare Lamy team at all, no sir. Incidentally, I didn't specify this particular detail back when I was going over Flare's or Noel's kits, but because of their Holy Union passive, both Flare's and Noel's arts and buster cards are actually compatible with either arts or buster buffs, since they're being treated as interchangeable types. I just figured I'd let you know, hopefully Botan doesn't mind. Next is the reverse harem simulator, Momosuzu Nene. She's our first alter ego of this video with 14,500 HP, 11,500 attack, and 0.70% MP charge on attack. She has a Lancer deck with 5-hit quicks, a 5-hit arts, 5-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's chaotic neutral and man attribute, and her alternate class is just caster. Her first skill is Super Nenechi EX, which has a shit ton of buffs. Oh, did I say a shit ton? Because I meant a fuck ton, since it increases her attack, defense, NP gen, star gen, and crit damage all by 10 to 20% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Masochistic Constitution Nene A++, which draws the attention of all enemies to herself for 2 turns and heals her when she takes damage from direct enemy attacks for 2,000 to 3,000 HP per attack for those 2 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. However, of note, if Nene takes damage from male enemies, her self-heal is doubled. Any health she recovers through this way is applied first before she takes damage. Her third skill is Happy Synthesizer EX, which allows Nene to share all of her currently applied buffs with one other ally except herself. However, she cannot share the buffs that she gets from her own second skill. She also increases her target ally's MP damage by 20 to 30% for 1 time, and grants herself invulnerability for 1 turn on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. She can use this buff on herself actually, but only if she's the last servant left on the field, and she just duplicates all of her currently active buffs. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C, which increases her arts performance in Star Gen by 5%, Blue Clapper Nene A, which increases the quick performance of all idle type servants deployed with Nene by 5%, Magic Resist C, which increases her debuff resist by 15%, and Independent Action A, which increases her crit damage by 10%. She also has Gomoteyamas EX, which increases her own attack and defense by 10% for every Spanish-speaking servant deployed with Nene, but these buffs are only active when these servants are currently on the field with her. Reverse Harem EX, which increases the attack of all male allies deployed with Nene by 15%, and Momosuzu's Seal of Approval B++, which increases her attack and defense by 15% whenever she's deployed in waterside battlefield stages. Her NP is Welcome to Nene Pro, which is a 5-hit AoE quick NP that deals 600 to 1000% damage to all enemies, and has a 500% chance to reduce their attack and crit chance by 30% for 5 turns and seal their skills for 1 turn. It also reduces all enemies' quick resist by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, which activates before the NP deals damage. Her Bond CE is What Could Have Been, which grants herself a 15% chance to stun her enemies when she attacks them with any attack. If she's deployed with any other 5th gen member or any Elizabeth Bathory servant, this CE charges their MP gauges by 50% at the start of any battle. Nene is another very experimental servant. Her signature ability is to share all the buffs that she has with another teammate. For the record, this ability is horribly broken because of the way skill activations work in FGO, because you can just use as many skills as you like in a single turn, making buff stacking not only incredibly easy, but also an essential part of FGO gameplay and a core mechanic behind setup teams. Nene takes the fullest advantage of this because she has the potential to ascend a teammate into another dimension by stacking all of her own buffs onto them. In a sense, she's the best buffer in the game, but only when you have plenty of other buffers to give her their own buffs first, which is basically FGO in a nutshell anyway, so I guess conceptually speaking, nothing's changing much. She's not just a buffer though, for what it's worth. She does have a healthy degree of utility, such as a taunt and all those debuffs on her NP. And make sure to take a number before you leave if you'd like to join Nene's husband collection. She'll call you when she's ready. Next, we have the Adidas Lion, Shishiro Botan. She's a rider with 12,500 HP, 12,500 attack, and 1.15% MP charge on attack. She has a Lancer deck again, with 4-hit quicks, a 2-hit arts, 1-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's true neutral and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Archer, and Assassin. Her first skill is White Lion's Deduction A+, which increases her star absorption by 300 to 600% for 1 turn, produces 10 to 20 stars, and increases party buster performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Marksmanship Botan EX, which increases her own crit damage by 30 to 70%, increases party crit damage by 20 to 30%, and grants herself evasion for 3 attacks, all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Trials of a White Lion A+++, which grants herself Guts for 1 time that revives her with 2,000 to 5,000 HP for 3 turns, increases party quick performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and allows her to select an MP type between Buster and Quick for 1 turn on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B+, which increases her arts performance and star gen by 9%, Magic Resist E, which increases her debuff resist by 10%, Apex Predator EX, which increases her crit damage by 15%, and further increases that value by another 5% for every additional servant deployed with her who also possesses the same base passive, and Blue Clapper Botan A, which increases the buster performance of all idle type allies deployed with Botan by another 5%. She also has Imperatrica EX, which increases the attack of all Russian allies deployed with Botan by 15%, and increases Botan's max HP by 1000 for every Russian ally deployed with Botan, and activates even if those Russian servants are deployed in her backline. Poi A, which increases the crit damage of her Buster and Quick cards by 15%, and Menya Botan A, which grants the party 1-time debuff immunity every time Botan uses her extra attack, and this can stack. Her NP is Shishiro Coaster, which is a 5-hit single target NP that first increases her MP damage by 20 to 60% depending on overcharge level, then deals 600 to 1000% buster damage or 1200 to 2000% quick damage to one enemy, obviously depending on what type it is. And her bond CE is Will, which grants her defensive class advantage against all classes that previously dealt neutral damage to her, and grants her neutral defensive status against berserkers, alter egos, and assassins. If she's deployed with any other 5th gen or any Elizabeth Bathory servant, this CE increases their defense by 30% that cannot be ignored. Botan is a straightforward DPS rider who's got the simplest kit that we've gone over in quite a while in this video, if only for the fact that she doesn't have a unique mechanic or some kind of custom effect that screws with the game somehow. However, what she does have is obscenely good base stats. A 12,500 attack rating in FGO would easily put her in the top 10 servants with the highest base attack ratings in the game or so, and her base MP generation rate is extremely potent, especially with crits, which she'll be getting a lot of because she's a rider. She's meant to be a solid and reliable DPS rider, and like I said before about simple skill sets sometimes being better for convenience's sake, sometimes it's more important to have consistent performance than a quirky gimmick that only works half the time or only when you put a ton of effort into making it work. And just for good measure, Botan's kit also has some team support so that she fits better into more teams without being a total liability like most DPSs. And just like for Toa and Suisei, I gave Botan a second profile too because I am biased as fuck. As an archer this time, Botan has the same HP and attack ratings, but her MP charge on attack stat changes to 0.85%, and her deck also changes to a balanced deck with a 3-hit quick, 2-hit arts, 1-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. Her first skill is Art of the Siege A++, which grants her critical star regeneration that produces 5 to 15 stars every turn, reduces all enemies' attack by 20 to 30%, reduces their crit chances by 20 to 30%, and increases party defense by 20 to 30%, all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Spoy A, which lets Botan choose one of 3 effects, have a 50 to 100% chance to stun one enemy for 1 turn, reduce their defense by 10 to 30% for 1 turn, or increase their crit chance taken, which is similar to increasing your team's crit chance against that one particular enemy by 10 to 30% for 1 turn on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Operator A+++, which increases her arts card star absorption by 300 to 500%, increases her arts performance by 30 to 50%, and increases her own debuff success rate by 50 to 100%, all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. She keeps her Territory Creation, Apex Predator, Blue Clapper, Menya Botan, and Imperatriza passives, but her Magic Resist passive is upgraded to C rank, which increases her buff resist by 15% instead. She also gets Professional A, which further increases her debuff resist by 20%, and Crit Chance resist by 20%, Veteran A, which increases her arts performance in Star Gem by another 7%, and Independent Action B, which increases her crit damage by 8%. Her final passive is Shooter Born in Heaven EX, which works like this. If Botan gets either a quick crit, an arts crit, and a buster crit, at least one of each kind in any order, or if she gets 3 arts crits total, all of her regular attacks in her next Brave Chain will automatically crit. Her NP is Botang Snipe, which is a 1-hit single target arts NP that deals 950% to 1500% damage to one enemy and grants her 3 stacks of evasion with no limit, though these evades do not stack. This NP also reduces its target's defense by 30 to 50% and increases Botan's crit damage by 100 to 200% afterwards, both for 3 turns. And her Bond CE is Rules of Modern Warfare, which increases the attack, defense, and crit chance resistance of all archer allies and allies who use firearms by 20%, and this effect activates even if Botan is in the backline with the CE. If she's deployed with any other Gen 5 member or any Elizabeth Bathory servant, it grants their NPs and their NPs only ignore invulnerability and increases their NP damage by 50%. Archer Botan is still a DPS, but now she's a more crit-focused arts archer with strong debuff capabilities that keep your team from taking too much damage while she pounds the enemies from across the map with arts crits. She should still be relatively simple to use, but you do need to use her more aggressively than you would with Rider Botan to get the most use out of her archer form. That, and thanks to her Shooter Born in Heaven passive, she does have an alternate game plan of playing around that passive to give her already very high damage ceiling an even bigger boost if you're willing to go the extra mile to make it happen. Lastly, we've got the whole circus in town, Omaru Polka. She's an alter ego with 13,200 HP, 12,200 attack, and 0.70% MP charge on attack. She has a 2Q2A deck with a 4-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 3-hit buster, and a 5-hit extra. She is chaotic neutral and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Caster, and Berserker. Her first skill is Hologram Circus A, which draws the attention of all enemies to herself for 1 turn, charges party MP gauges by 5 to 10% every turn for 5 turns, and further charges her own MP gauge by another 5 to 10% every turn for 5 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her second skill is I'm Not Menhera B, which reduces her own debuff resist by 100% permanently, which counts as a buff, and consumes 10 crit stars. If there aren't enough stars, then the skill reduces her star gen by 100% permanently as a buff. In exchange, it grants her 3 stacks of evasion that refresh if she still has stacks left over and she uses the skill again, and increases her anti-humanoid damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Loser Girl C, which reduces her own attack and defense by 20% permanently as buffs, but it lets her choose what her MP type will be between arts and quick for 1 time. Of note, once Polka chooses her MP type by using the skill, her NP will stay that type for the rest of the battle until she chooses otherwise when she uses this skill again. It also increases her own NP generation rate when taking damage by 10 to 20% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual B-, which increases her arts performance star gen by 7%, Magic Resist D, which increases her debuff resist by 12.5%, Blue Clapper Polka A, which increases the performance of all idle type allies dominant card types by 5%, Lightless Smile EX, which increases the efficiency of all buffs received from chaotic or evil allies by 10%, which is additive. However, this buff won't stack if allies are both chaotic and evil. Item Construction C, which increases her own debuff success rate by 6%, and Circus Symphony A++, which increases her arts performance and healing received by 11%. Her NP is ND Baby, which is an install and single target utility NP that first removes all of Polka's currently applied demerits, both buffs and debuffs, and puts them on her target enemy instead, permanently. The demerits are all treated as regular debuffs when Polka transfers them this way. It also increases either her arts or quick performance afterwards by 10 to 30% depending on what her NP type is, permanently. It also reduces her target's arts or quick resistance, again depending on what type her NP is, but only to Polka by 20 to 40% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is Shakespearean Fool, which gives her NP a 3-time buff block effect onto its target and increases the efficiencies of Polka's NP effects, both a self-buff and a debuff on her overcharge, by 20% additively. It also increases the debuff resistance of any other Gen 5 member or any Elizabeth Bathory servant deployed with Polka by 100% and reduces their damage taken by 2,000. Just like Nene from before, Polka is another very experimental servant. What is with me and making super experimental alter egos anyway? In any case, Polka's gimmick is to cast debuffs onto herself first and then put them on one enemy instead using her NP. This should sound familiar because Asuki also has this same ability, roughly speaking. The difference between them, mainly, is that Polka gets stronger and stronger the longer she's alive because she'll keep giving herself permanent buffs over time unless her enemies have a buff removal effect to keep her in check, while Asuki actually gets slightly weaker in a utility sense over time because of her permanent stance change. That and Asuki is an Avenger while Polka is an alter ego, and it's actually not a bad thing to have some role redundancy among servants as long as they occupy different classes so that you have access to the same game plan in multiple scenarios depending on counterclass situations. And with that, that's the end of 5th gen and thus the core Japanese crew. Let's go to Indonesia.
窓を開けて小さくつぶやいた How are you? 誰もいない
First up for Hololive ID 1st gen is Ayunda Risu, who are both a caster and berserker in one with 13,800 HP, 11,000 attack, and 0.51% MP charge on attack. They have a full caster deck that they both share with a 4-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 3-hit buster, and a 3-hit extra. They are lawful neutral, but their attributes are different. Ayunda is Earth, while Risu is Man, which is kind of ironic if you think about it. Their only alternate class, which only applies to Ayunda, is Avenger. Their first skill is NNNB+. As Ayunda, it has a 150% chance to reduce all enemies' debuff resist by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and reduce their crit chance by 20 to 30% also for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. As Risu, though, it has the same debuff resist debuff, but instead of reducing their crit chance, it reduces their attack this time by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Their second skill is Witch and Squirrel A++. As Ayunda, it charges her own MP gauge by 30 to 50%, increases her arts performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and causes all of Ayunda's skills to gain the effects of Risu's versions for 1 turn on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. As Risu, it increases her MP gauge by 20 to 30%, increases her own attack by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and causes all of Risu's skills to gain the effects of all of Ayunda's versions for 1 turn on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Their third skill is Mystic Eyes of Suggestion D+. As Ayunda, it removes buffs from all enemies, has a 20 to 30% chance to stun them for 1 turn, and increases her own MP damage by 20 to 30% for 1 turn on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. As Risu, it removes party debuffs, has a 50 to 80% chance to stun all enemies for 1 turn, and reduces their defense by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Their passives are Territory Creation Virtual C, which increases their arts performance in Star Gen by 5%, Symbiosis Risu A, which increases their debuff resist and debuff success rate by 10% each, but causes their skill cooldowns to be tied together, which means that even if they switch classes, their skills will still be on cooldown if they were used recently. They also have Nuts EX, which produces 4 crit stars every turn, and Mad Enhancement E, which increases their buster performance by 2%. Similar to Roboko, their NP is You Are King, which is a 3-hit single target arts NP. As Ayunda, it gives her the option to change her class to Berserker to switch to Risu first, or she can stay as Ayunda, then increases her NP damage by 30% for one turn, and then deals 900 to 1500% damage to one enemy. It also reduces her own skill cooldowns by 1 and produces 30 to 50 crit stars. As Risu, it also gives her the option to change her class to Caster to switch to Ayunda first, or she can just stay as Risu too, then increases her MP damage by 30% for one turn, and then deals 900 to 1500% damage to one enemy. It also reduces her own skill cooldowns by 1, and heals her for 3000 to 7000 HP. Risu's Bond CE is Squirrel Meat Dog, which increases both her own and Ayunda's MP generation by 20%. When Risu specifically is deployed with Korone or Okayu, it increases both of their attacks by 15% and grants them both Guts for one time, no limit, that revives them with 1 HP. If she's deployed with both Korone and Okayu, it increases all their attack and defense by 15% and the same Guts effect. Ayunda's Bond CE is the Forest, which increases both her own and Risu's arts performance by 20% and anti-humanoid damage by 30%. It also gives Ayunda the ability to perform an emergency class switch on your turn if Risu is the one out on the field and is at below 50% HP, and fully heals her if she does perform this switch, but she can only do this once per battle. Ayunda Risu is another 2-in-1 servant, but what makes them different from, for example, Fubuki, is that they share skill cooldowns, or in other words, if you use any of their skills in either of their forms, if you switch to their other form, that same skill on that other form will also be on cooldown. In exchange, however, before you start battle, you can actually choose whether you want to have Risu spawn first or Ayunda, depending on the situation. Risu is an arts berserker who has a caster deck thanks to Ayunda being a caster. I'm sure you can imagine how that'll go in the current JP meta. More than that though, she relies heavily on debuffs as a core part of her game plan, with low skill cooldowns and skill cooldown reductions on her MP on top of it to ensure that she can keep up a steady flow of debuffs onto the enemy team. And whatever you do, don't look into her eyes.
Look into my eyes. You saw nothing. Nothing.
Next, we've got the real Shacho, Moona Hoshinova. She's our second Moon Cancer with 13,800 HP, 11,100 attack, and 0.61% MP charge on attack. She's got a balanced deck with a 4-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 5-hit busters, and a 4-hit extra. She's both neutral good and evil, and Sky attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Caster, and Berserker. Her first skill is Crescent Moon A, which increases the hit counts of all of her normal attacks by 1 for 1 turn, increases her own regular damage when normal attacking by 30 to 50% for 1 turn, and increases her own Star Gen by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Half Moon A, which grants herself Evade for 1 turn, increases the hit counts of all of her normal attacks by 1 for 1 turn again, and increases her arts performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Eclipse Moon A, which grants her invulnerability for 1 turn, increases the hit counts of all her normal attacks by 1 for 1 turn again, and increases the performance of any one of her card types by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her arts performance in Star Gem by 6%, Symbiosis Moon A, which increases both her debuff resist and debuff success rate by 10%, and it increases her own damage against enemies with any active debuff by 20%, and Usada Construction A+, which increases party arts performance and debuff success rate both by 11%, and if Pekora is deployed with Moona, it also increases Pekora's quick performance by 11%. She also has Moon Goddess's Essence EX, which increases her own damage by 300 and increases her debuff resist by 30%, and it also increases her own attack and NP damage by 20% when she's deployed to Moonlight stages. Blood Moon EX, which increases her own Buster performance by 10% and gives her Buster cards a 15% chance to double their damage. And when this happens, it also increases the attack of all evil allies deployed with Moona by 20% for 3 turns. And Starlight Fate EX, which charges her own NP gauge by 5% when she attacks with Buster cards. Her NP is Lunatic Full Moon, which is a 3-hit single target arts NP that first grants herself a unique Lunatic buff, more on this later, and it increases all Moon Cancer allies' attack by 30% for 3 turns, including herself, then deals 900 to 1500% damage to one enemy. It also reduces their quick, arts, and buster resistances and NP damage by 20 to 40% for 3 turns. The Lunatic buff on her NP turns Moona's entire deck, except for her NP, into Moonlight cards, which are cards that can be treated as any card type. Think of Noel's and Flare's Holy Union passive from earlier in this video, but instead it's for all of Moona's regular attack cards, including her quick card. Again, they can be used interchangeably for any quick, arts, or buster chain, which is determined by the original type of the leadoff card in the chain. And her Bond CE is Ai no Chisana Uta, which increases the party's buff removal resistance by 100% and their dominant card performance by 10%. If Pekora is deployed with Moona, it increases Pekora's max HP and base attack rating both by 3000. Moona is a DPS Moon Cancer, contrasting with Pekora's earlier support Moon Cancer role. Her main gimmick is the ability to directly add hit counts to her normal attacks, which is a mechanic that is extremely rare in FGO for the main reason that doing so is utterly broken for the most part. That being said, Moona's skills each only add 1 extra hit to her regular attacks, and by themselves, they're not that big of a deal. But once she starts stacking 2 or more of her skills together, and on the off chance that you're running double Moon Cancers with her and Pekora for whatever reason, that's when her hit count mechanic really starts to get out of hand, giving Moona some solid burst damage for an extra class on top of being FGO's first 5-star Moon Cancer with a single target arts NP. Last for Holo ID Gen 1 is Airani Iofifteen, or just Iofi, or Lo-Fi, depending on how you look at her name. She's a Lancer with 15,500 HP, 10,800 attack, and 0.51% NP charge on attack. She has a caster deck which would be unique for Lancers with a 2-hit quick, 3-hit arts, a 1-hit buster, and a 5-hit extra. She is lawful good and earth attribute, ironically, and her alternate classes are Archer, Rider, Caster, and Foreigner. Her first skill is Polyglot EX, which increases party attack by 10 to 20% for 3 turns and gives her a unique controlled buff for 1 time 3 turns. This controlled buff allows Iofi to increase the party's buster, arts, and quick performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. How it works is that when Iofi uses the skill, the attack buff activates immediately, but she can independently activate her party projection buff within 3 turns of activating the skill on whichever turn that she wants within those 3 turns. Her second skill is Erofi EX, which has a 30 to 70% chance to charm all enemies for 1 turn, and increases this chance if her target is male. If the charm succeeds, it also decreases their defense by 20% for 3 turns. But if the charm fails, it increases her own party's defense by 20% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Of note, this skill calculates its effects individually for all available targets. Her third skill is Wingman A++, which increases one ally's dominant card performance by 20 to 30%, increases their star absorption for that card type by 2,000 to 4,000%, and increases their crit damage when attacking with that card type specifically by 30 to 50%, all for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 5%, Magic Resist C+, which increases her debuff resist by 15.5%, Item Construction B, which increases her own debuff success rate by 8%, and Extraterrestrial A, which increases the attack of all Hololive ID and EN servants and all Star Attribute servants by 10%, though this effect does not stack. Her NP is Area 15, which is a support arts NP that grants all allies evasion for 2 attacks and grants herself a star regen buff for 5 turns that produces 10 to 20 stars every turn. It also increases party crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is an alien with a paintbrush, which increases party attack and MP gen by 10% each. It also further increases the attack and MP gen of all painter or artist type allies by 20% for a total of 30% each. Iofy is a Lancer, which I know there haven't been too many in the video so far, and on top of that, she's a rare support Lancer with both a full caster deck and incredible damage support skills. The one that stands out is her first skill, which has a unique mechanic of allowing Iofy to control when exactly she wants to activate the skill's color buffs for better support capability, which is why I called it a controlled buff earlier. She doesn't have other conventional support effects like heals or debuff cleanses, so she's better used as a setup support or a plug suit buffer than as a dedicated support, though her NP is very strong if you can get it up and running. As for why she's a Lancer, well, I'll be honest, I just imagined Iofy running around with an oversized paintbrush like what Hokusai does in FGO already, and I kinda figured that she could be a Lancer that way because why the hell not? That and I need an excuse to put more Lancers into this video.
We honored hero!
Now for Holo ID Gen 2, starting with the biggest simp in Hololive other than Matsuri of course, Kureiji Ollie. She's a saber with 14,000 HP, 12,500 attack, and 0.70% MP charge on attack. She has a Lancer deck with 3-hit quicks, a 4-hit arts, 5-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She is chaotic good and man attribute, and her alternate classes are Archer, Rider, Berserker, and Avenger. Her first skill is Super into Marvelous Princess's EX, which increases her attack by 10 to 20%, further increases her attack against female enemies by 20 to 30%, and increases her crit damage by 20 to 30%, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Boundless Sunshine Undead A, which charges her own MP gauge by 30 to 50%, increases her MP gen by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and increases her star absorption by 400 to 600% for 1 turn. But she also gives herself a 500% chance to grant herself a delayed debuff for 3 turns that also has a 500% chance to stun herself for 1 turn after those 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Hololive Saga B+, which grants herself Guts for 1 time, 5 turns, that revives her with 1 HP and increases her buster performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn. It also gives her an on MP activate buff for 1 time that increases her buster performance by 50% for 1 turn on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 6%, Magic Resist E, which increases her debuff resist by 10%, Udin's Benevolence A, which increases her own healing received by 30%, and Revenant EX, which reduces her own defense and debuff resist by 10%, but increases her own MP damage by 15% and grants her instant kill immunity. She also has Loyal Undead B, which only activates if she's deployed with either Rushia or Mori. It nullifies the debuffs that Ollie normally gets from her own kit, and grants her first skill an additional 2-turn taunt effect, and Ollie starts the fight with a permanent 1-time Guts that revives her with 1 HP and can't be removed, and it also stacks with all other Guts. Oh, and before I forget, Ollie also has Apex Predator B, which increases her own crit damage by 8%, and you already know the second half of this passive. Her NP is Hololive Paradise, which is a 1-hit single target buster NP that first reduces her own defense but increases her attack both by 30% for 3 turns, then deals 600 to 1000% damage to 1 enemy. It also increases her buster and quick performance by 20 to 40% afterwards for 5 turns. And her Bond CE is the Ramen Shop, which grants her invulnerability for 3 attacks, increases the Guts count on her third skill to 2 instead of 1, and improves the MP damage efficiency on her Revenant passive to 30%. If Botan is deployed with her, Ollie heals for 1500 HP every turn. Ollie is a DPS saber and a glass cannon on top of that, with no defensive capabilities other than the Guts that she's got. She full sends her damage, just like how she full sends herself into any female VTuber stream or Twitter account that she can get a hold of. But when she's on the same team as either Rushia or Mori, things change a bit because then she becomes a DPS tank saber with her 2-turn taunt. Her base stats are actually quite good, and without her usual demerits holding her back, she doesn't need to worry as much about dying as fast as she normally would. In fact, as you might guess, Rushia is Ollie's best teammate by far, or one of her best, though it'll be kinda tricky managing 2 DPS servants at the same time. Next is Saori Hayami, Chris Vector, Anya Melfissa, that's correct. She's an assassin with 12,500 HP, 11,500 attack, and 0.56% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 6-hit quick, 3-hit arts, 5-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's true neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Caster, Berserker, and Avenger. Her first skill is Pure Eyes Karis EX, which ignores invul for 3 turns that can't be removed, has a 500% chance to reduce one enemy's defense by 20-30% for 1 turn, has another 500% chance to further reduce that enemy's defense by another 10-20% for 3 turns, and grants herself a star regen buff that produces 10-20 stars every turn for 3 turns on an 8-6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Pensaxala A+++, which increases her arts performance by 20-30% for 1 turn, further increases her arts performance again by another 20-30% for 3 turns, increases her crit damage by 30-70% for 1 turn, and further increases her crit damage again by 20-30% for 3 turns on an 8-6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Jeweled Blade Karis EX, which grants one ally invul for 2 attacks, increases their star absorption by 2,000 to 4,000% for 3 turns, and increases their star gen by 50-100% for 3 turns. It also increases the attack and crit damage of all assassin allies, including herself, and the Fubukis by 20-30% for 3 turns on an 8-6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual C+, which increases her arts performance and star gen by 6%, Presence Concealment A+, which increases her star gen again by another 11%, Magic Resist EX, which increases her debuff resist by 25%, Freeloader A+, which consumes 3 stars every turn as demerit, and Vectors of Fate EX, which increases the base class damage modifier of all assassin allies to 1.1x, and this effect activates even if Anya is in the backline. She also has Grudge Blade B, which increases her damage against cursed enemies by 20%, and Violet Ashes EX, which gives Anya the ability to remove enemy guts with any of her attacks. And if an enemy has a guts that can't be removed, it increases her damage against them by 30% instead, so long as they have that particular irremovable guts. Her NP is Curse of the Karis, which is a 7-hit single target arts NP that first applies the Curse of the Karis status onto one enemy for 3 turns, which increases their damage taken by assassins by 30%. Then deals 900 to 1500% damage to them, then has a 150% chance to instant kill them. It also inflicts curse onto them for 5 turns that deals 1000 to 3000 curse damage every turn. And her bond CE is Blessings of Zelrech, which starts her with 50% charge for any battle, increases party buster, arts, and quick performance by 10%, and further increases buster, arts, and quick performance for all assassin allies by another 20% for a total of 30%. Anya is a hybrid DPS assassin who's a crit assassin for the most part until it comes to supporting other assassins, in which case she specializes in that because she's got buffs that only work for them, unless your name is Shirakami Fubuki, of course. Assassins are kind of a meme in the FGO community because while there are some strong servants in the assassin class, most of them aren't. So I'm hoping that making Anya as strong as she is here could be a way to address that and make assassins a bit less of a meme. And public service announcement to give your own small boing boing dagger at least 10 hours of sleep every day. And last for the Hololive ID crew, our favorite turkey, Pavolia Reine. She's a caster with 13,700 HP, 10,900 attack, and 0.40% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 4-hit quick, 6-hit arts, 2-hit busters, and a 6-hit extra. She is lawful evil and man attribute, and her alternate classes are archer, rider, and assassin. Her first skill is Pavo Real A, which increases party attack by 10 to 20% for 3 turns. It also further increases the attack of all royalty servants by 10 to 20%, further increases the attack of all Indonesian servants by 10 to 20% and increases Marine's attack by 20% all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. All these buffs also work for Reine wherever applicable. Her second skill is Mother's Blessings EX, which grants her invul for 1 turn and increases her art's performance by 20 to 30% for 5 attacks, no limit, on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. If Reine uses this skill before her art stacks are fully used, they will stack. Her third skill is Yabe B+, which charges her own MP gauge by 30 to 50%, heals the party for 3,000 to 5,000, ignores her own offensive class disadvantage for 3 turns, and inverts Marine's offensive and defensive class disadvantages for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation C, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 5%, Lady of the Peafowl A, which increases the arts performance of all bird-type servants deployed with her by 15%, This Is Fine EX, which reduces her own burn damage taken by 90%, Interior Design Inspector B, which increases party NP gen by 8%, Attention Please A++, which increases one of every ally's arts card's NP generation rate by 50% every card cycle, and this stacks with crits, and Apex Predator C, which increases her crit damage by 5%, and you know the rest. Her NP is Reine Online, which is a 3-hit AoE arts NP that first removes all defensive buffs from all enemies, then deals 450 to 750% damage to them and inflicts buff block onto them for 2 times, no limit. It also increases party debuff resistance by 50 to 100% for 5 turns. And her bond CE is Hololive Tea Time, which increases servant damage proportional to their bond level. So at bond 5, it gives a 10% damage buff all the way up to bond 15, which gives a 60% damage buff. Reine is a hybrid DPS caster with quite a good amount of utility and support. Notably, she can put buff blocks on all enemies and keep spamming them if she's in an arts team, on top of giving the team what's basically a budget debuff immunity effect with all the debuff resistance buffs that she'll be spamming too. Much like how Anya has a buff that works for Fubuki, Reine also has her own for Sensho, which means that they'll have a great time hunting down assassin enemies together, that's for sure. But Reine herself can pack quite a punch thanks to her first skill that gives her a 60% attack buff at max level and her 50% battery. Just don't call her a turkey and it'll be fine. Done with Hololive ID. Last but certainly not least, Hololive EN. First up, we got your boy Mori Calliope. She's a Lancer with 13,600 HP, 12,300 attack, and 0.54% MP charge on attack. She has a balanced deck with a 4-hit quick, 4-hit arts, 4-hit busters, and a 4-hit extra. She's true neutral and earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Saber, Archer, Rider, Caster, Assassin, Berserker, Ruler, and Avenger. That's a lot of classes, I know. Her first skill is Off With Their Heads EX, which increases party arts performance by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, and grants the party an on-attack activate buff for 3 turns as well, which increases party attack by 5 to 10% for 3 turns when attacking with any arts card on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. This buff activates for every time one of your servants, not just Mori herself, uses an arts card. Her second skill is Mystic Eyes of Death Perception False EX, which ignores invul, increases her arts performance by 30 to 50%, and has a 150% chance to reduce one enemy's instant kill resist by 80 to 120%, all for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Memento Mori EX, which increases her damage against enemies with an active insta-kill resist debuff by 30 to 50%, increases her crit damage by 30 to 50%, and gains 5 to 10 crit stars with every attack that she makes on enemies with that active insta-kill resist debuff, all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance and star gem by 12%, Magic Resist EX, in quotes, which increases her debuff resist by 30%, Wine Party B, which increases her healing received by 8%, Deadbeats A, which generates 10 stars whenever she attacks with a quick card, ASMR A+, which increases her own healing power by 21%, Overworked A++, which reduces her own defense by 12% as a demerit, and Divinity A, which increases her own damage by 200. She also has Reaper of the Seven EX, which permanently increases her attack by 5% for each enemy that her party defeats in battle. These stacks are irremovable and apply to Mori even if she's a sub-member, and all of these effects also apply to any of Mori's teammates who have expressed an interest in her in the past, so for example like Suisei. Memories of Samael EX, which increases her own defense against divine enemies by 50% and reduces her damage taken from angelic enemies to 0. It also renders her immune to King Asan's Azrael NP if she's ever hit by it for some reason. And At the Boundary EX, which grants herself instant kill immunity, increases her charm resist by 100% and has a 10% chance to insta-kill enemies with any normal attack. Her NP is Cursed Knight. It has 2 versions, and Mori has access to both of them at the same time whenever she has a full NP gauge. They're both arts, but one is single target with 4 hits, and the other is AoE with only 1 hit per target. It first increases her NP damage by 30% for 1 turn, then deals 900 to 1500% damage as a single target, or 450 to 750% damage as an AoE. Both ignore defense to their targets as well. They also both deal 150 to 200% extra damage to them if they have an active insta-kill resist debuff and has a 100 to 150% chance to straight up insta-kill them anyway. Her bond CE is Your Mori, which grants the party insta-kill immunity and increases party arts performance by 15%. So back when I first started this project, one of my stream viewers asked me to make Mori broken as fuck. 6 months later, I'm happy to report that she is in fact broken as fuck. It's definitely not because she's my favorite EN girl, I don't know what you're talking about. Anyways, Callie is a DPS Lancer who fucking shits out damage. Everything about her is damage, damage, and more damage. Call me Phil Swift, cause that's a lot of damage. And as if her damage output by itself weren't enough, she also has access to both a single target and AoE MP at the same time. And unlike Ayame, they're both available to her at all times whenever she has her MP fully stocked. But in exchange, she has no defensive measures of her own. In fact, one of her passives permanently reduces her defense, making her really glass cannon as fuck. She does have conditional defense and damage immunity to certain enemies, which are great when they're usable of course, but obviously you won't be facing those kinds of enemies all the time. So this means that she's still heavily reliant on teammates to keep her topped off, but that really shouldn't be an issue, especially not with all the other VTubers that I made profiles for throughout this video. And despite her weaknesses, Callie is still broken as fuck, and I fucking love it.
Oh, Scotty, it's the end of the party. Let's hit the road before I have to flash back to Shinigami, Modo, Shinu Hodo.
But that's not all. I made a second profile for Mori, this time as an assassin. Again, I'd like to remind you that this has nothing to do with the fact that Mori is my favorite EN girl, no sir. She has all the same base stats and traits as her Lancer form, including deck and base card hit counts, but she does change her attribute from Earth to Sky. Her first skill is Live Again EX, which increases her insta-kill success rate by 50 to 100% and her arts performance by 30 to 50% both for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Affection of Death EX, which charges her own MP gauge by 30 to 50%, applies a unique Kiss of Death status onto one enemy for 1 turn, which reduces all incoming damage from that enemy, specifically going to Mori, to 0, and prevents them from receiving any buffs or charge. It also removes all their buffs and reduces their instant kill resist by 80 to 120% for 4 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her third skill is complicated. She has 2 third skills actually, the first one being Omori EX. It grants her true invul for 4 attacks, no limit. When they're all used up, Callie can then activate one of 2 unique buffs called White Space and Black Space. White Space gives Callie the ability to fully restore one ally, which fully heals them, clears all their buffs and debuffs, and charges their MP gauge to 100%, and resets their skills so that they're all immediately available again. Black Space, on the other hand, allows her to immediately reduce one enemy's or ally's HP to 0, and it counts as an instant kill. Note that Callie can use White Space on herself, but not Black Space. This skill also increases Callie's MP damage by 30 to 50% for 1 time whenever White Space or Black Space is used, and it can only be used once per battle. Once it's used, it gets replaced by another skill called Mystic Eyes of Death Perception True EX, which increases her arts performance every turn for 4 turns. It also gives her Guts for 1 time 5 turns that revives her with 50% HP and stacks with all of their guts and changes her entire deck to arts cards for 4 turns. The Buster buff for Mori on Kiara's second skill also gets converted into an arts buff for Mori instead when she uses her Mystic Eyes of Death Perception in this class. However, it also has a 500% chance to give Mori a delayed buff for 4 turns, and once those 4 turns are up, that delayed buff has a 500% chance to sacrifice her outright as a demerit on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. She has many of the same passives as her Lancer version, but she's also got some new ones. Death Waits for Everyone EX, which lets Callie ignore Invul permanently, Death Toll EX, which grants her own arts cards a 10% chance to insta-kill whenever her Mystic Eyes of Death Perception true skill is active, and Divinity, which gets upgraded to A++ rank and increases her damage by 230 this time. She also gets Red Dominion EX, which activates only when Callie sacrifices herself after 2 other Idol-type allies also get defeated before her in battle, and it triggers the Guts effect specifically on Callie's Mystic Eyes skill. If this happens, this passive will revive Mori with full HP, refresh skills, reset status so no buffs or debuffs, and 100% MP gauge. It will also permanently change her class to Berserker, and this is the only way for Mori to become a Berserker. And lastly, she gets Red Apotheosis EX, which is mostly the same as Red Dominion, except it can activate after just Kiara is defeated. If all the other conditions are met, then Callie changes her class to Avenger instead, and this is also the only way for her to become an Avenger. Her NP is also Cursed Knight, just like her Lancer forms, and again, Mori has access to both a single target and AoE NP at the same time, though her AoE NP now hits twice per enemy. It deals 1200 to 1800% damage as a single target and 600 to 900% damage as an AoE that ignores defense to enemies, and then deals additional damage to them as true damage, which is the rarest form of damage in the game, because true damage is always class neutral and can't be blocked or resisted in any way. The amount of true damage that Mori deals is based on how much damage she took, with her true invul stacks from her Omori skill multiplied by her true damage multiplier based on her MP level, which scales from 2 to 4. Her NPs also deal 150 to 200% extra damage to enemies with an active insta-kill resist debuff, and have a 50 to 100% chance to straight up insta-kill their targets, same as before. And her Bond CE is post-traumatic, which grants the party insta-kill immunity and removes the sacrifice self-demerit from her Mystic Eyes skill. Assassin Callie is another DPS assassin, but while she is undoubtedly extremely strong, at least on paper, I honestly feel like Lancer Mori is overall a better servant gameplay-wise, since her whole kit kind of works together better, whereas I don't feel like Assassin Mori's kit has like the same level of cohesion. Rather, Assassin Mori is more of an exercise in prioritizing my headcanon behind her as an assassin over her actual gameplay, because Assassin Mori is realistically the closest she'll get to inheriting death as a concept. Theoretically, she can get even closer by becoming either a Berserker or Avenger, but she's not supposed to be those classes, which is why it's so difficult for her to turn into them. That and death as a concept isn't supposed to be materialized at all, not even as a servant, so if a servant tries to pull that off or is forced to try, their spirit origin will get eroded until it's gone completely, even from the Throne of Heroes, not unlike how the sun will just burn everything that gets too close until it's gone. However, because Mori's been a Reaper and has worked with death for so long, she can actually become death itself in place of Death Sensei, but only very briefly, since her human body will get Thanos if she's infused with death for too long. Still, she can maintain this form for long enough to warrant a class change into either Berserker or Avenger, depending on the conditions that she goes through prior to transforming. Honestly, it's not that much of a stretch to consider Mori's assassin form as just as an access point for you to be able to use her as a Berserker or Avenger. It's either that, or I'm too lazy to make her another 2 profiles, take your pick. And now next is the Reaper's girlfriend, Kiara Takanashi. No, not that Kiara, she's bottom right. She's a saber with 15,000 HP, 11,200 attack, and 1.09% MP charge on attack. She has a Lancer deck with 5 hit quicks, 2-hit arts, 2-hit busters, and a 3-hit extra. Her alignment is bottom left, because of course it had to be, and she is Star Attribute. Her alternate classes are Rider, Caster, Berserker, Ruler, and Shielder. Her first skill is, pardon my pronunciation, Flammendes Phoenix A+++, which infuses the party with a unique Flames of the Phoenix buff for 3 turns that can't be removed. This buff increases the party's damage by 20 to 30% and causes the party to all inflict burn onto their targets when normal attacking, and all burn demerits inflicted this way stay for 5 turns and deal 1000 to 2000 damage every turn to their targets. If Mori is deployed with Kiara, then the skill also increases both of their crit damage by 20 to 30% and doubles their burn damage inflicted, all this on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Kiara's second skill is Marioku Hoshitsu Fushicho A+++, which increases her buster performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn, increases her quick performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and increases her defense by 20 to 30% also for 3 turns. If Mori is deployed with Kiara, then it extends the buster buff's duration to 3 turns total, further increases Kiara's defense buff by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, and increases Mori's buster performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. And just for the record, all of the Mori buffs in Kiara's skills apply to any version of Mori. Her third skill is Astral Genesis EX, which grants herself a unique rebirth buff for 5 turns, which allows her to revive 2 turns after taking a fatal hit with full HP, but otherwise keeps the same status that she had at the time that she was defeated. It also increases her MP gen by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance in Star Gen by 12%, Magic Resist EX, which increases her debuff resist by 30%, just like Mori, and Bottom Left EX, which reduces her Charm and Mental debuff resist by 500% as a demerit. She also has KFPA, which increases party healing received by 20%, and Intersection of Life and Death EX, which increases her attack by 20% and also increases Mori's attack by 20% if they're deployed together. She also has Eternal EX, which immediately revives Kiara with 50% HP and permanently increases her buster and quick performance by 20% if she dies to insta-kill, and this passive does not use up any active guts or rebirth buff. Divinity EX, which increases her damage by 250, and Apollo's Flame A, which inverts the party's burn damage demerits so that burn statuses put on them now heal them instead of damaging them. Her NP is Dawn's Impact, which is a 7-hit AoE buster NP that grants herself Guts for 3 times, that revives her with 1 HP, and infinite duration, but doesn't stack with itself. Of note, if she already has Rebirth active, then a Rebirth buff will be used up first if she takes a fatal hit, and deals 450 to 650% damage to all enemies, and burn damage to them that deals 3000 damage every turn for 5 turns. It also increases party buster and quick performance by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. And her Bond CE is Life and Death, which grants the party Guts for 1 time that revives them with 1 HP and stacks with all other Guts. If Mori is deployed with Kiara, then it grants them both 100% buff removal resist and heals them both for 3000 HP every turn. As you might expect, Kiara is a DPS saber with Guts effects out the ass, which is a crude way of saying she won't ever die as long as you play her properly, though there are some things that can still give her trouble if you're not paying attention. Of note, Kiara hard counters enemies who can insta-kill. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you even remember, since it's literally been hours since then, I know, because of the way the insta-kill mechanic works in FGO, it's overall a pretty shitty mechanic when you, the player, use it, but it's extremely dangerous if enemies use it against you, no surprise. And since instant death goes right through hard defense skills like evade or invul, the only thing that can keep your servants alive from it is Guts. Not only does Kiara have plenty of them, but Kiara has a passive that makes her permanently stronger every time she gets insta-killed, so enemies need to beat Kiara the old-fashioned way, for what it's worth. Next is Hokusai's new best friend, Inanis Ninomae, or just Ina, and she's a foreigner, no surprise. She's got 14,250 HP, 11,800 attack, and 0.25% MP charge on attack. She has a caster deck with a 4-hit quick, 6-hit arts, 4-hit buster, and a 5-hit extra. She is lawful neutral and star attribute, and her alternate classes are caster and foreigner. Yes, I know. Her first skill is Conservation of Sanity EX, which inflicts a unique sanity check status onto all enemies for 3 turns. Every turn while this status is active, if an enemy uses a quick card, it first reduces their quick performance by 20 to 40% for 1 turn before they deal damage. If they use an arts card, it reduces their arts performance by 20 to 40% for 1 turn, and if they use a buster card, it reduces their buster performance by 20 to 40% for 1 turn. These debuffs apply to both NPs and normal attacks. If the enemies that Ina is fighting don't have any card types, then it reduces their attack by a flat 40% for 3 turns. It also reduces their buff success rates by 20 to 40% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is High Templar of the Void A, which grants her defensive class advantage against enemy foreigners, increases party NP damage by 20 to 30%, and increases her own arts performance by 30 to 50%, all for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Kokusung EX, which changes her alignment to Chaotic Evil for 1 turn, and inflicts a unique Wailing status onto all enemies for 1 turn. This status forces all enemies to target each other rather than your own team, normal attacks, NPs, and debuffs. If there's only one enemy, it instead has a 500% chance to stun them for 1 turn and reduces their MP gauge by 2. It also charges party MP gauges by 5 to 10% every turn for 5 turns, all on a 9 to 7 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance in Star Gem by 12%, Existence Outside the Domain EX, which produces 2 stars every turn and increases her debuff resist by 12%, Divinity A+, which increases her damage by 210, and Kanalumi EX, which increases her arts crit damage by 15%. She also has Guidance of the Ancient Ones A, which increases her attack by 20% when her alignment is evil, Leviathan EX, which produces 30 stars instantly at the start of any battle, and Art of the Ancients A+++, which increases party arts performance and MP generation rate by 10%. Her NP is Violet Death, which is a 6-hit arts AoE NP that first silences all enemies for 1 turn, which mutes their active buffs and blocks all incoming ones for that turn, then deals 450 to 750% damage to them. It also has a 500% chance to reduce their debuff resist by 50 to 100% and their defense by 20 to 40% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is the Ancient Ones, which changes her alignment permanently to Chaotic Evil, and allows her to change any of her arts cards, any number of them, on any one of your turns in combat to buster cards, including her NP. It also gives her second skill an additional effect of increasing Ina's buster performance by 30% for 3 turns. Ina is a support foreigner who's designed to mess with enemies in ways that most other debuffers can't by affecting their buff success rate and forcing them to attack each other, which is a mechanic that's unique to her. This version of Ina isn't the usual Bob Ross Ina that we know, who constantly makes bad puns on stream. No, this is the Ina who's gonna sit you down and talk to you about your sanity and how you're not gonna have any once she's done with you. You might have noticed that one of her alt classes listed at the beginning of her profile is also foreigner, even though she already is one here. Much like Abigail in the actual game, who's a foreigner in both her base form and her summer version, Ina also has another foreigner alt, and that one is more indicative of the punny Ina we know and love. Next is a chart that goes Gaogura. She's a Lancer with 14,400 HP, 11,600 attack, and 0.53% MP charge on attack. She has an Assassin deck with 4-hit quicks, a 5-hit arts, a 1-hit buster, and a 6-hit extra. She's Chaotic Dumb and Earth attribute, and her alternate classes are Rider, Assassin, Berserker, and Alter Ego. Her first skill is Seaborn Rhythms A+++, which increases her arts and quick performance by 20 to 30% each, and her Star Gen by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Animal Communication Ocean A, which charges her own MP gauge by 30 to 50%, increases the attack of all animal or monster type servants, including herself, by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and increases her own MP damage by 20 to 30%, specifically when she's on waterside battlefield stages for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Memories of Atlantis B+, which overrides the current stage that Gura is on with a waterside battlefield stage instead, and increases the efficiency of all of Gura's offensive buffs, both ones that are currently applied and ones that she receives for that turn, by 50% for one turn, which is multiplicative, not additive, and increases her buff removal resist by 100% for 3 turns, and increases party defense that can't be ignored by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX in quotes, which increases her arts performance in Star Gym by 15%, Magic Resist A, which increases her debuff resist by 20%, Blessings from Poseidon C, which increases her damage by 150 and reduces her own damage taken also by 150, Idols Are Friends Not Food A, which increases the attack of all idol type allies by 10% and the attack of all pirate type or seafaring servants by another 10%, and Shark Venture EX, which increases her quick crit damage by 15%. Her final passive is Reflection in the Water EX, which works like this. Every one of Gura's normal attacks have a 20% chance to spawn an additional attack that deals equal damage and ignores invulnerability, but it can't generate crit stars or charge Gura's MP gauge any further. If Gura or the enemy she's attacking is at or below 50% HP, or if she's currently in waterside battlefield conditions, the chance that she'll dual attack like this is increased to 100%, and these follow-up attacks are affected by both evil buffs like Towa's Sadistic Charisma or Pekora's War Criminal skill, and buff success buffs like Ayame's Nakiri skill. Her NP is Ride on Time, which is a 4-hit quick AoE NP that deals 600 to 1000% damage to all enemies, then increases her own crit damage by 30% for 3 turns, and then grants herself evasion for 3 attacks. It also has a 40 to 80% chance to charm all enemies for 1 turn, and if Gura is in a waterside battlefield stage, this chance is doubled. And her bond CE is the Sea of 1,000 Stars, which doubles the duration of the waterside battlefield override effect in her 3rd skill and increases party defense and MP gen by 30% while waterside battlefield is in effect. And if Gura's team is fighting on a stage that is already waterside battlefield by default, this CE produces 15 crit stars every turn. Gura is a DPS Lancer with an Assassin deck, which means that she's decent at Star Gen and not actually all that great at doing damage like she's supposed to, because quick cards in FGO are fucking trash. So to make sure that Gura doesn't hit like an absolute potato, I gave her the ability to amplify her own buffs and a dual attack mechanic which is unique to her. I might have overtuned Gura's damage by doing this, but that's okay. It's definitely not broken or anything, I swear. She does have an environmental trigger that overrides all other environments, so you do need to be aware of this on the off chance that she's teamed up with other servants who also have environmental triggers of their own. But to be fair, there aren't all that many of that kind of servant, so whatever, fuck it. Other than that, quick PSA to give your cat shark head pats and pizza on the regular. And lastly, our favorite ground-pounding gremlin, Amelia Watson. She's an archer with 14,400 HP, 11,600 attack, and 0.77% MP charge on attack. She has a Lancer deck with 4-hit quicks, a 3-hit arts, 2-hit busters, and a 5-hit extra. She's chaotic neutral and star attribute, and her alternate classes are caster, assassin, and ruler. Her first skill is Marksmanship Watson A++, which grants her a unique crack shot self buff for 5 times 5 turns that increases her attack and crit damage with each successful crit. Her attack buff scales from 0 to 20% at level 1, all the way up to 30 to 50% at level 10, and her crit damage buff scales from 0 to 20% at level 1 as well, all the way up to 50 to 100% at level 10. It also gives her evasion for 3 attacks on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Watson Concoction A+, which reduces one ally's HP by 2,000 first as a demerit, which actually can kill them, so do be careful when you use this thing, but gives that ally one of 3 sets of buffs, a 40 to 60% quick buff for 1 turn and a 40 to 60% Star Gem buff for 3 turns, a 40 to 60% Arts buff for 1 turn and a 40 to 60% MP generation buff for 3 turns, or a 40 to 60% Buster buff for 1 turn and a 10 to 20% attack buff for 3 turns on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Chronology of Tempered Time EX, which gives one of 3 effects to one ally: Time Distortion, Time Rift, or Time Break. Time Distortion increases its target's crit chance by 50 to 100% for 1 turn. Time Rift increases their buff removal resist by 50 to 100% for 1 turn, and then extends the duration of all their currently applied buffs and debuffs by another turn. And Time Break, which gives them true invulnerability for 1 turn and charges their MP gauge by 50 to 100% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation Virtual EX, which increases her arts performance in Stargem by 12%, Magic Resist D, which increases her debuff resist by 12.5%, Ground Pound A+, which increases her attack against enemies with less than 50% HP by 10%, and further increases her special damage against Mother-type servants by 30%, and these effects can stack. Riftwalker C+, which gives her a 15% chance to evade any attack, and Into the Breach B, which charges her MP gauge by 30% immediately at the start of any battle. She also has 3 more passives: Mischievous Mythbuster EX, which increases her buster crit damage by 15%, Time Alter Watson EX, which grants her MP Seal immunity, and Virtual Trendsetter A++, which kind of works like this. All of Amelia's cards, when used as leadoffs in a chain, have improved leadoff bonuses. Her buster leadoffs increase party attack by 10% for 3 turns, and this occurs before Watson deals damage. Her arts leadoffs charge party MP gauges by 10%, and her quick leadoffs add 5 crit stars per quick card used in that chain. Her NP is called Excel Trigger, which is a one-hit single target quick NP that grants her Ignore Invulnerability for 3 turns first, then deals 1200 to 2000% damage that ignores defense to one enemy and reduces their MP gauge afterwards by 1. It also produces 20 to 40 stars depending on overcharge level. And her Bond CE is Timeless, which turns all of Amelia's 3rd skill effects into party buffs instead of only applying to one teammate. So Amelia is another flex servant who can swap between DPS and support at any time. Her defining skill is her 3rd, which lets her or one of her teammates do some crazy shit that would definitely break the game if it ever got into FGO for real, assuming her Watson concoction doesn't break you first. Keep in mind that Amelia appreciates having Stargen support since she probably won't be able to supply herself with all the crit stars that she needs to ground pound every mom that she sees in FGO. As much as she's capable of even showing appreciation in the first place whenever she's not yelling at her own chat. And with that, we finally reached the end of the video, folks. I hope you've enjoyed all these fan-made FGO servant profiles that you've seen so far. But before I go, I've actually got one last bonus servant profile to share with you. While she's not necessarily from Hololive, I think many of you will recognize her anyway. To complete the trifecta of the world's cutest angels with Toa and Kanata, we have Amelia's sister from heaven, Amatsuka Uto. She's a ruler with 15,000 HP, 10,500 attack, and 0.55% MP charge on attack. She has a caster deck with a 3-hit quick, 3-hit arts, a 3-hit buster, and a 3-hit extra. She's lawful good and sky attribute, and her alternate classes are archer, caster, and foreigner. Her first skill is Angel's Creed EX, which grants the party good status except herself for 3 turns, increases party star gen by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, and produces 20 to 30 stars immediately on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. If her allies are already good aligned, then they get a 10% attack buff for 3 turns. Her second skill is Archive of Heaven's Gate EX, which increases the party's arts performance by 10 to 20% for 5 turns. It also infuses the party with a unique blue archive buff for 5 turns, which does several things. It prevents any MP charge that your party gains specifically with arts cards from being drained, changes the base arts card damage scaling from 100, 120, 140% to 100, 135, 170% instead, and increases the MP generation bonus from arts leadoffs from 200 to 250%. All this on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is For God So Loved the World EX, which increases the attack of all good allies by 20 to 30%, including herself, and increases party's special damage against evil enemies by 20 to 30% both for 3 turns. It also has a 500% chance to reduce all enemies' attack by 10 to 20%, and further reduces all evil enemies' attack by another 10 to 20%, both for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation C, which increases her arts performance in Stargen by 5%, Magic Resist EX, which increases her debuff resist by 25%, 5th Heaven EX, which increases the buster, arts, and quick performance of all divine or angelic enemies by 20%. Beatific Reinforcement EX, which increases the attack and defense of all Saint-type allies by 25%, Shotgun Rain B++, which increases the damage multiplier on all crits dealt while Blue Archive is active from 200 to 250%, and ASMR A, which increases her own healing power by 20%. Her NP is Welcome to the World of Uto, which is a support and utility arts NP that first has a 70% chance to inflict sleep onto all enemies for 3 turns. Enemies who are asleep are essentially stunned, but they will wake up if they're attacked and lose their sleep status early. However, Uto also increases their crit chance taken to 100% for 1 attack each while they're still asleep. This NP also grants the party a unique Blue Heaven buff, which is a shield or barrier that protects each ally. This shield has several special properties. It has no duration limit, and it increases the NP gen of the servant it's protecting by 20% for as long as it's active. When taking damage, the shield takes damage first before your servant does until it's fully broken. Successful insta-kill attacks will immediately break the shield no matter how much HP it has, but the shield will block the insta-kill attempt and keep your servant safe. When it's destroyed, Blue Heaven will reduce the skill cooldowns of your servants by 1. And finally, if your servants still have their shields, when Uto uses her NP again, Tenshi will refresh your servants' shield HP, which scales from 3000 to 5000 depending on her NP level. It also grants the party, as if that weren't enough, regular HP regen that recovers 2000 to 3000 HP every turn, and increases the party's debuff resistance by 30 to 50% both for 5 turns depending on overcharge level. And her bond CE is Angel Beats, which increases party debuff resistance by 30%. It also increases the arts performance of all good allies by 20% and recovers 2000 HP for them every turn. Tenshi is an incredible art support ruler who also has natural synergy with a good variety of allies. The funny thing about Uto's kit actually is that her arts buff itself isn't very strong, which is normally a good indicator to know whether or not a servant is an art support, but it's literally everything else that she does for your team's arts cards that are extremely powerful, which is kind of a nice way of saying that they're honest to God broken. I strongly considered making an archer profile for Uto for this video, especially considering her new outfit that Nabi Mama gave her recently, but I decided to go with ruler instead just for a bit more class diversity throughout this video overall. Just make sure to give her a shotgun at some point and I'm sure she'll be happy. And finally, we've reached the end. If you've watched the entire video and you're still here, thank you very much for taking the time to watch the whole thing. Even though this probably doesn't matter now, let me properly introduce myself before we leave. I'm an avid gacha game player who plays FGO, Girls Frontline, Azure Lane, Arknights, and Genshin Impact, and I'm pretty much a whale in all of them. And here on this YouTube channel, I make a few videos about them whenever I have the time, but more often these days I actually stream these games, mainly FGO and Genshin, over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ToeSniper98. So I've been working on this video for the past half a year, ever since the start of 2021 after a stream viewer of mine suggested that I make a video like this. So in case you were wondering, this video was actually not inspired by the Hololive alternative videos that were released several months ago. That was just a nice little coincidence, though I did take some inspiration from them while working on this video. In any case, I've actually made similar videos in the past, specifically for Toho projects, so I figured I'd do the same for Hololive since I really enjoyed making those kinds of videos. And especially these days with some fan art out there on Twitter or wherever depicting the Hololive girls as part of like a gacha game, like I've seen some Genshin fan art of them somewhere, I think of Hololive EN. I figured I'd make this video as my own little contribution. Once again, if this weren't abundantly clear by now, I'd like to remind you all that this video is entirely fan-made and indicative of nothing official. I did this just purely for fun and because I think a possible Hololive and Fate Grand Order collaboration would be really cool, well, at least much better than whatever dumb idol event that JP FGO had recently anyway, but that's just my opinion. I hope you enjoyed watching and seeing the ideas that I had in this video, especially if you also play FGO yourselves, whether it's JP or NA. And now it's time for me to shill a little bit here at the end. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please consider subscribing whether you're a Hololive or a general VTuber simp. Like I mentioned before, I also stream on Twitch over at twitch.tv/ToeSniper98, same name as my YouTube channel, and I stream mainly gacha games these days, so if you play any of the ones that I mentioned earlier, maybe stop by and say hi while you watch me waste my money on pixels or something, I don't know. I also write fanfiction in case that's up your alley. Right now I'm working on an AU quintessential quintuplets fanfic that combines the quint setting with a bit of the Nasuverse, so in case you're a fan of either, consider giving it a read if you'd like. All the links to my shilling and my socials is in the description below. Other than that, that's about it for me. Again, thanks for watching, and until next time, deuces.
You'll